Okay, so we're live on the air. I was planning a debate with someone tonight. However, sadly, they've had to drop out due to technical issues. So instead, we've got a nice impromptu debate. Not debate, sorry, a stream with some lovely people. Tonight with us, we have Ted Shires, we've got Piper, we've got Music Man Mike, otherwise known as Michael Rowlands, and Luna Veg, otherwise known as Ashley. How are you all, everyone?
I'm very good, thanks.
Excellent to hear, Ted. How about the rest of you? How are you?
I'm good. I was going to say something really negative, but I couldn't think of it on the spot. So yeah, I'm great.
Brilliant.
Yeah, just really hot. It's like, I don't know, while I was away, I think Hastings relocated to the surface of the sun or something. So I got back.
Excellent.
And yeah.
I'd imagine it's quite warm in the southern hemisphere at the moment, given it's like what?
Yeah, I think we're in the summer. I think the summer at the moment, which I suppose is why it's hot.
Certainly.
Michael, where do you live?
All right,
you don't mind me. I live in Hawke's Bay in New Zealand.
Oh, New Zealand. Okay.
Oh yeah, I was going to say that Michael is a Kiwi.
Hi. I've had this talk with a lot of people because like a lot of Americans know the fruit as a kiwi. They're like, oh, it's a kiwi, and then I tell them about the bird, and they're like,
I immediately knew that the bird or that kiwi was after the bird and not the fruit.
Yeah, I know the
bird actually looks like the fruit.
Yeah, it does actually.
Yeah, it does actually.
I never actually thought of that. That's funny. I wonder if they're green on the inside.
I knew
Probably
about
not.
The bird because when I was a kid, I used to I was big into like learning about animal stuff, which most kids are, but I was like nerdy about it. Like I used to read a lot of books and stuff, and so as a result, like I know a lot of obscure animals like that. I guess
we here in New Zealand we used to have there used to be a big bird like it was kind of like an ostrich, but same kind of color as the kiwi.
Emu?
What's that?
Was it an emu?
No, they called it. It was called a moor, and they're big. They're extinct now, unfortunately. But so you imagine an ostrich, how big an ostrich is. These things were bigger than that, and then we also used to have a giant eagle that hunted those. So that's kind of terrifying. But they're all. I know they're both extinct now, unfortunately. But yeah, pretty incredible.
And whilst we were talking about the origin of the word Kiwi to describe a New Zealander, two new people joined the live chat. So say hello to Aircraft Sparky and American Anarchist. How are you both?
Hi.
I'm doing well, thank you.
Excellent. How about you, Anarchist? If they're there.
I think she's muted.
Has his mic muted.
Hey,
oh shit! I was basically monologuing, and then I heard someone say that my mic was muted.
Not gross. Hey, Sparky, are you able to like green screen some cool special effects in behind you while you're there?
Yeah, when I do my live streams on Wednesday nights at 8 Central U.S. Standard Time, yes, I have a virtual studio where I bring guests up and everything. So
that's really cool.
Yeah, it's
do you
fun.
use broadcasting software? Do you?
I feel like I've been fast already. Like my technology is like surpassing the standards on this channel. Like green screen.
Honestly, I started out with just an American flag as my background, and I got a little bored with it. So now I use green screen through OBS. It actually changes production quality a whole lot when you're streaming.
So does OBS have a green screen option? Does it? Because I use OBS as well.
Yes, it does. Go through the chroma filters and pick a color. That works.
Okay, I'm gonna have to start doing that. That's cool. Yeah, I like OBS. I use it a lot.
So also, Streamlabs has an OBS style program associated with them that you can use through the website. I haven't tried it yet, but I've heard good things about it.
That's cool. We're getting an echo from somewhere again.
Oh,
Perhaps
7 of us.
I hope it's
could
not
be.
for me.
generally, the way that we do it on other live streams and stuff, we if you're not talking, go ahead and mute yourself, and then it sort of cuts out any echoes. And then if you want to talk, then just unmute. It's usually how it works pretty well, unless you've got headphones.
Yeah, that's a pretty good idea. I just have to remember to do it. And we now have our 8th guest, Lonely Wolf.
Hi.
Hey, yeah.
Lonely Wolf, someone who I am very familiar with and who is a pretty frequent flyer on my channel.
On a lot of channels.
Yeah. Representing the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah,
you and Roland.
I think I was the one who was here representing first, so...
Yeah.
Yeah, but Troy is way cooler than you are, Mike.
Oh, now Mike plays guitar. You've got to give him that.
Oh, I see how it is.
He is a Kiwi, but don't hold that against him.
That was very rude, Rose. Very rude.
I mean, Troy knows math very well. That's my area of... I'm showing that I'm a nerd, but, you know, that's what I think cool people should be judged by, is how well they know math.
The Aussies beat us in the cricket, so... Australia beat us in the cricket, so, I mean, we've got that.
Well, I mean, I've got...
And we beat Australia in the cricket.
A guitar.
You didn't?
I don't know how to play it, but I've got it. And I've got a ponytail, so... I am the coolest one in this chat.
So do we have a topic that we would want rather than just...
I have a pony. Your argument isn't valid.
I also have a bunch of those plushies, but like they're all on my bed. Actually, no, there's 2 right here. I could show it, but I don't want to turn my camera on. So.
I mean, I have a Pegasus stuffed animal that I won at an arcade.
No, see, what you gotta do is you gotta be like me, and you gotta get like 3 or 4 of them on eBay and pay like $10. You gotta do that.
See, we got 2 animals here. Like we got Rose's animal, and you got like mine, and like his is like a badass kind of one. Mine's kind of the plushy, friendly.
Hers.
Got a bird on his shoulder.
But Ashley, you mentioned you had something to talk about, so take it away.
Oh, yes. So, you see, today on Twitter, I was searching the Twitters like I do sometimes, and I actually began this rather interesting exchange with one Paul Elam.
I saw too.
Oh, yes. This was rich. Okay.
Do you have the tweets there? You could maybe show us on a screenshot.
Well, actually, they're on my phone. Fortunately, I don't really know.
Share them. I can share them if you like. Hold on.
Sure. Okay, so started with these. What was the first one? Fuck.
Yeah, okay, here we go. I got the screenshot,
there we go.
So I can do that.
Okay, there we go. The first one was like, oh fuck, my computer is... I need to fix my computer. It's not plugged in, and it's running low on power.
If you if you click on my little thingy, yeah, cool. So that's the original tweet, right?
Yeah, that's the original tweet where I don't even think he just he was whining because some people were talking about toxic masculinity and how it is kind of related to these mass shootings. And I quote tweeted it because that's what I do sometimes when horrible people say stupid things. I quote tweeted it and repeated this meme that it comes from The Simpsons. If you guys don't get it, you can Google it. I tweeted it saying, "Old man continues shaking his fists at clouds."
Simpsons reference, essentially. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I've only ever had one exchange with him before, like, he blocked my ass.
Oh.
And it was a very weird one. I fucking liked the Dick Coughlin video, which was a really fucking... It was a satire video called A Message for Add an Ear for Men. And fucking Paul Elam thought that I was sharing it, and he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna get to that video," and then basically he like blocked me for sharing a video mocking him.
Okay, but it gets better. Okay,
But it was literally like, how do I get myself out of the fuck zone?
Okay, so the first thing that he does is he quote tweets my tweet, my quote tweet. It's like quote tweetception. Where is it?
Oh,
where is
quote
it?
tweetception. That's an Owen McDonald classic. If you've ever have you ever seen the arguments between Owen McDonald and other people on Twitter? Owen.
Okay, so the first thing is that he quote tweets my tweet and says close at Airheads, as in he's shaking his fist at Airheads. Yeah, sure, Jan. Then one of his fangirls, he has fangirls. I don't know how that happens. Accuses me of being ageist and sexist. And I said to her, "I take it you don't watch The Simpsons." Then Paul says to me, "I take it you watch a lot of TV." To which I say, "Not really. I take it you don't read much."
Wait, so he thought.
To which he says to me,
"You watch a lot." He thought "I take it you watch a lot of TV" was like a good comeback.
I guess.
Well, I mean, it seems like his implication that he was trying to go for is like, "Oh, you must watch a lot of TV. You must be very lonely," even though a lot of people watch a lot of TV.
I don't even know.
It seems like this weird, kind of "Oh, you know, you can't get a man to fuck you, so you watch a lot of TV." Like that. That's what I think was probably I think that it was probably something convoluted like that, knowing Polly.
Something stupid. But he goes on.
I don't even know what the point of that comeback was, to be honest. I can't discern.
He can't let
actual point.
He can't let the mean lady have the last word. But anyway, he says you're a TV clone. Using lines from TV shows to try to appear pithy in the place of real arguments. No shame in it, Cupcake. Embrace your true self right there on the sofa.
Cupcake? What?
Yes, gross. To which I said, first of all, don't call me Cupcake. Secondly, none of your bio is worth taking seriously. Again, you seemingly don't even get what toxic masculinity refers to. Okay, so then he says, "No, Cupcake, this is not how it works." Again, gross. You don't get to toss ad hom my way, then dictate what I can call you in response. Secondly, if none of my bio is worth taking seriously, you can prove that by shutting up and going away. Now run along. And it's just...
I'm gonna take this shit really personally. Oh yeah, I forgot how mean you were. Rez is like, "Oh, you're so mean."
Yes, I'm so evil because I tell mean people that they're mean, and I'm not particularly gentle about it.
I do love how Paul Elam sounds like some cartoon villain here. Like, "Oh, run along, Cupcake."
Run, little girl, run along.
It sounds almost like a really cliche D&D session. You just have the villain.
I was gonna say, was that like his tweets, his style of tweeting reminds me of like old people on Facebook.
He is an old person on Twitter.
He's like,
God, that's so ageist. Oh my God.
Yeah,
I find that
who put him in charge of men's welfare? I mean,
been going on, and we've got Southern Hemisphere people talking over each other.
sorry.
So it, as much as I'd like to say it, as much as I'd like to say it ended there, it didn't, because I couldn't let it end there because I don't know why. Maybe I'm a masochist. I quote tweeted it, and I quote tweeted that last comment of his, and I said, "This man just needs a beating from some very large women." It was.
I'm happy to oblige.
You would like to be one of the very large women to beat him?
I mean, I'm a very large woman.
Okay, and
230 pounds and 6 feet tall. I'm not skinny.
Okay,
sorry,
so
bro, your voice doesn't match.
It's fine.
Fair enough.
Okay, so but then he couldn't let it end there either, so he quote tweeted me and said, "And where on earth can we find obese, bovine women who advocate violence against men they disagree with? That's easy. Any feminist group. In fact, I'm talking to one right now. Tell me, Cupcake, how much do you weigh?" And then 3 laughing emojis.
I don't know if Paul Elam has ever looked like in the mirror, but like him calling out other people's weight is not like the most smart tactic on his part.
That's like War Corps being like, this fat, ugly feminist.
Like, I don't know, maybe he slimmed down, but the last time I've seen like a picture of Paul Elam, he had a pretty big dad belt going on there.
Yeah, again, bovine. Like his language is so like if he put his mind to like a different field, he could probably be like a really good writer. But no, instead he's spending his time like screaming at people who to question.
Move with me, people. Move.
Graduate from Bovine University.
Move. I am cow. Hear me move. I weigh twice as much as you, and I look good on the barbecue. Thank you, thank you, Arrogant Worms, for that song.
Okay.
I disagree with the looking good on the barbecue thing, but other than that,
yeah, ditto.
I won't argue that.
Friends, not food. But
you don't make friends with salad. You don't make friends with salad. You don't make friends with salad.
Shut up, Mike.
Erica also has another song saying that vegetable constitutes murder, but I will stop there.
Okay, so of course I went on, and I quote tweeted him, and I said, "Simple. Come get introduced to roller derby the hard way. Be sure to bring a mouth guard, Angel Face." And then I added 3 kissing emojis.
Angel Face, he is divine. I guess so. Angels could look like most anything.
Keep in mind that Lucifer was an angel too.
Oh yeah, good point.
I mean, to be fair, if you look at the Bible, you could argue that Lucifer was the only angel that ever actually did anything good for humanity.
Fair enough. Okay, so then he apparently he didn't quote tweet me, but he said to me, he saw an actual picture of my face, and he said, "And woo wee, just saw your pic, a disgusting porker, just like I thought. Tell you what, Cupcake, I'm gonna help you out here. It's not the fat, it's the carbs." Okay,
fucking if Polly Lam, like if I had seen that, I'd been like, oh sweetie, you criticizing people for how they look. If you only knew what irony meant.
Yeah, Rose. At this point, the gloves were off, and I was just like, okay, fine, all bets are off. So I quote tweeted that, and I said, "I'm a disgusting porker." Yeah, that's so heartbreaking. Coming from a guy who looks like the creepy neighbor from Home Alone, if he actually was a crazy shovel murderer. Maybe don't comment on other people's looks until you lose the windowless van look.
Oh, now come on. Let's be fair here, because driving around in a windowless van with free candy and puppy spray painted on the side is a great way to pass time.
Do you speak from experience?
Well, yes. How do you think I met my daddy? Come on.
Oh my god.
Oh god.
Oh my god, you guys.
So,
I feel
went
about
ahead and
that joke.
him as well, because I thought that it was kind of stupid that Paulie Lam was calling people bigoted for a bunch of reasons. One of them was the fact that he seemed to think that calling out toxic masculinity makes you bigoted for some reason. I assume the reason is because he doesn't actually know what toxic masculinity refers to. Generally, these kind of people think that it means that all masculinity is toxic, which is wrong. So there was that bit, which I thought was stupid, and then I went ahead and found just easily enough a tweet from Paulie Lam being a misogynistic piece of shit, and the irony of him doing that. And it's also kind of funny because more recently, on Twitter at the moment, the whole Black Panther thing has been a thing, and so all of these white supremacist idiots are complaining about the fact that Black Panther is apparently a black supremacist film because it's got black people in it.
No, that isn't why. Now, that isn't why, Mike. To be honest, the reason why is because Wakanda is the outright wet dream with dark skin. That's all it is.
It's a what now?
See, what had happened was
Wakanda is the outright wet dream.
What is the? I haven't seen the movie. So what's the Wakanda?
Well, okay, in Wakanda, they do not allow any type of immigrants whatsoever. You can only be black. I mean, essentially, it is an ethno state. So yes, it's an alt-right wet dream, but because the skin is dark, people give it a pass.
That was what the alt-right were saying. That was what the alt-right were saying. Is that like, it's just
I'm not gonna take the alt-right seriously on what the actual thing of the film was, because
I'm not getting that from the alt-right.
They legitimately twist everything to fit their agenda. So I'd have to watch the film myself to see.
It's really interesting. Exactly. The movie itself was interesting. It wasn't bad, but it was interesting.
Yeah,
it was.
No spoilers. No spoilers.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen it either. But like, people were complaining about it before it even came out.
I'm gonna see it soon.
It had a majority of black people, so it's like
it looks very pretty. It does look very pretty.
It just seems to me people are trying to find problems with the movie.
Honestly, I can't wait to see it, and then I also can't wait to see Infinity War, Avengers: Infinity War.
Yeah.
The whole toxic masculinity thing. I'm assuming this is in association with the recent shooting that happened at the school.
Yeah.
Okay, now this is my question, and okay, I'm not a feminist. I'm not a liberal. I'm a conservative libertarian. Okay, I try to talk to everyone, but my question is, how is that shooting related to toxic masculinity when a dude was too much of, well, not even man enough to really address this shit head on with his fist? He had to engage with a firearm. I mean, really, there's nothing manly about shooting unarmed people.
Isn't the use of firearms and violence and a masculine thing? It's the whole. That's kind of the whole point. Isn't it?
Well, it's also a sign of weakness. I mean, it takes a bigger man to walk away from things than it does to just and go and kill everything.
I mean, this might also just be because the the term toxic masculinity, I feel sometimes just doesn't get explained, and that's kind of what a lot of people like that can capitalize on. But
fuck.
but like, but basically, the term toxic masculinity, at least how it was originally coined, was meant to refer to more toxic behaviors taught to men, and not implying that there's like something inherently toxic about men, or even that like it's really manly. It was more to talk about like, you know, teaching people that like violence is how you deal with your problems.
Well, okay, but
so if you look at the cases,
if you look at the
violence or bottling it in.
If you look at the structure of the like phrase, I mean, like toxic is the adjective and masculinity is the noun. Like with anything, you can put an adjective toxic in front of any noun, and it doesn't mean the noun is now inherently entirely toxic. It just means that this element.
So an example of how toxic masculinity relates to mass shooting. If you look at Elliot Rodger, which everyone kind of knows about, right? Elliot Rodger felt entitled to affection and attention from women. That is born out of a toxic aspect of masculinity, and so he took it upon himself to punish people for the fact that he wasn't getting what he felt entitled. So in that particular case, you could argue that toxic masculinity had quite a big effect, and in fact was much of a reason why the thing happened. Now you can go ahead and assess. I mean, we don't know a lot about this dude. We kind of do. A lot of people are blaming mental illness, and a lot of people are blaming this and the other thing. But surely you can look at the thing and see that an aspect of it, and something that connects a lot of the mass shootings, is in fact toxic aspects of masculinity.
Yeah, men who are taught essentially that the only way to address their emotions is through violence. And you can sort of see a bit of an intersectionality between that and also race as well, like the idea that white men are sort of being suppressed by the system and stuff, and they have to take their anger out on to groups who aren't white men, like women, like ethnicities, like we saw in with the ideas behind what the shooter was, you know, sort of thinking. Like if you look at the group chats he's in, he said some pretty horrific stuff about black people, about Mexicans, about LGBT.
Which is hilarious because he's Mexican himself.
Well, he's got a Spanish surname, but that's quite common in
No.
America.
His Spanish surname is from his father. He, even though he was adopted, he kept his father's name. Yeah, and the whole white nationalist thing that he. Pardon?
What's the Mexican stuff to do with?
Well, his name is Nicolas de Jesus Cruz.
Okay,
he was adopted. He was adopted by a white family. But when I think it was Time that came out with the article said that he was working with white supremacists or whatever, or no, it was the AP that pushed that. Basically, they got trolled by 4chan. So journalists do your due diligence. Actually verify things. Don't find people who are just out looking for publicity, be it good, bad, or indifferent. So the AP and a lot of news organizations got egg on their face. Now today's narrative is the NRA taught this child how to kill people, do mass murders. Well, no, the NRA gave a $10,000 grant to the JROTC group that he belonged to at the school prior to him being kicked out, expelled from that school. In fact, one of his people on that same rifle team that received some of that money from that grant given to the JROTC basically died trying to protect one of their classmates. So really the whole NRA thing is a non sequitur too. It's just a series of really bad
I think
narratives.
the NRA is necessarily a non sequitur thing. They have a huge influence over the policies that go into
exactly.
guns and
but
things
to say
America.
that they specifically
No,
funded
I'm not
his
saying
training
that
is where I'm saying.
Yeah,
We were
no,
talking
that's
about,
fine, but we don't necessarily need to talk about that. We can talk about the NRA's overall influence on gun violence in America, and I think that it's definitely something that needs to be talked about because I don't know, this happens again and again and again. Like people saying, what 28 to 30, I don't know, somewhere between 25 and 30 mass shootings or gun-related thingamajiggies happened in America since the beginning of this year.
Okay, there was a report that came out that said that there's been 18 school shootings that's happened since January 1st of 2018. There has been 18 incidences with firearms at school shootings. What people do not know is a lot of these weren't really like, attacks on the school or anything. One was a stray bullet shot off campus, away from campus.
Why
no, that
matter?
actually does matter. That actually does matter.
It's their guns being fired in the vicinity of people. That's bad.
Yeah, can I jump in here?
Yeah, go for it. Mm-hmm.
I think we need to start listening to the kids, because those are the voices I've been hearing. Those are the voices I've been trying to amplify on social media and stuff. Are the kids who are saying this is bullshit? It's ridiculous that we can't even. One of the best things I saw was some teenager calling out Trump on Twitter, just being like, we don't need your thoughts and prayers, we need action, and so this doesn't happen again.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's all fine and dandy. There's nothing wrong with listening to victims. I've been around shootings. Okay, I've been in combat. Yeah. I understand the stresses involved with it. I'm sorry, I'm not going to take any suggestions from some child who doesn't really understand the Constitution.
So what do you understand?
When
I'd just like to know what you'd suggest that could help.
Honestly,
reduce mass shootings and gun violence in America.
Honestly,
yeah, just
exactly.
Yeah, okay, in general. Very, very quickly, I don't believe that there should be a gun-free zone. I believe that places like educational institutions and stuff, hear me out before everyone starts, going crazy on me, is you allow teachers to get level 3 cleat certification. That is the same certification that you see with armed security guards. It doesn't take away from their job. It's just in case of an emergency, hey, they are concealed carry and they can actually fire back. The biggest problem that you see with mass shootings and stuff is police response times. If you have a good guy with a gun, these instances.
Good guys with a gun don't stop bad guys with guns. I'm sorry, that's just.
Wait, we don't need these. We don't need these empty platitudes. We need action.
Well, that is action.
Yesterday.
Okay, it's now is not an action. The whole idea of trying to take away the Constitution that the United States was built on is not an action. That's actually tyranny.
No, stop. It's not about tyranny. It's not about my own position on gun control and arms is complicated. I'm not all like, let's get rid of all the guns ever and like let's not allow guns for self-defense. I'm not in that camp at all.
Well, and that's fine, but I'm talking about common sense things. Some people are like,
can I respond to good guy versus bad guy with guns thing, please, first before we move on? Okay.
Can we hear from Ted? Is it okay if we hear from Ted as well? Because I think he's saying something.
Was he trying to? Sorry, I totally missed that. Do you want to talk, Ted? Go
for it. I just wanted to say, why could anyone justify having firearms in schools?
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, I was about to add on that is the whole having like a good guy does not stop a bad guy with a gun. And the example that I was going to give is Chris Kyle, the American sniper guy. Him and a friend were driving another friend to a driving range because he had PTSD and they wanted to try and help with PTSD. And they were both shot and killed, even though they both had guns and they were trained military men with guns. If those two guys can't stop a bad guy with guns, I mean, introducing more guns to the situation doesn't stop.
I think that's part of the problem with this mass shooting anyway, a part of the gun culture, and I don't know if like adding more guns to the situation would dissuade the gun culture problem that we have in America. That's one of the facets that I think we as a country just has to combat and confront and acknowledge that we have a gun culture problem.
Just quickly before everyone starts, just quickly. Seeing as we all want to sort of say stuff, I think I'm going to like write down the order everyone wants to like say things in, so that we're not all like cutting each other off and stuff. So I'll jot down who wants to. So does anyone have anything to say like right now? And I'll like write down.
Yeah, can I say a couple things?
So we'll go aircraft, Sparky. Then who after Sparky?
Piper, I think, wants to say something.
Piper.
Yeah,
Ashley,
I want-
what to say, I think.
No, I don't have anything else to say about this topic.
Okay, so it's just Sparky and Piper then, yeah?
I'll say more things.
Oh,
Got lots to say.
Mike.
I might have a few words, but I don't have much to say.
Okay. So Sparky, Piper, Mike, and Chris, and then I'd like to say something at some point as well. And then we'll move on. So Sparky, take it away.
Okay, well, see, here's the problem that I have. I don't agree with gun-free zones because gun-free zones just make a soft target. As prior military, as a vet, who's someone who's been in combat zones, I know that areas that are declared gun-free, that are sans weapons, sans defense, they're nothing but a soft target looking to be shot at. Most of these people who do these quote-unquote mass shootings are themselves cowards and are honestly looking to inflict as much damage until the police respond and eventually take them out. Yes, they may know that they are going to die doing the deal, but they also have that slight glimmer of hope that they're going to be able to leave prior to the time police respond. Average response time of police in the United States of America is 11 minutes. Considering that the police are a reactionary force and we do not want to take them beyond that, we do not want them as a preventative force. We want them to be a reactionary force. That way they don't infringe on the liberties of the American citizen. That you would want to take away the soft target. So what you would do is you would allow teachers to volunteer for a program for level 3 cleat certification where they can carry a gun and defend their students if the problem arises. Now, it's not saying, oh, more guns is the answer. No, I'm talking about proper training, maybe a little bit more money for those teachers and stuff, but also a means to defend the students. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and you don't have to hire more people, thus creating more positions for benefits that need to be filled, costing the state even more money. So you just raise the pay of these teachers up who volunteer for this because they're taking on an additional duty. And, you know, it may not solve the problem, but it would be at least a deterrent because people don't go in shooting up police stations because they know that it's a non-starter. They're going to end, and they're going to end quick. You know, and that's not what they want. So if you make it to where there's deterrence, because that's really what guns are really good at, is to be used as a tool for deterrence. If someone steps into my house, people know everywhere that I move, I have guns. And people do not break into my house because they have seen those guns, and that is a deterrent. I really hope I never have to use my weapon in defense of my family, you know, or any other person. I've had to do it in war, and it's not a fun thing. But all at the same time, deterrence. What keeps honest people honest? Okay, think about this for a moment. You have locks on your door. That lock doesn't really stop a criminal. Your windows don't stop a criminal. That stops honest people. So if you really believe that taking away guns from everyone is the answer, then I have this challenge to you. Leave your windows open and your door open at all times, even when you leave the house. Put a little note on front stating, hey, please don't rob me. Thanks. Have a nice day, and see how long your stuff exists or if your family is safe under those conditions. Honestly, there are some shit people in this world. Not all of them. Hashtag there's a lot of great people in this world, but there's also a lot of shit people. And it's deterrence for the shit people is what we need. My opinion.
Okay, so I believe it was Piper after Sparky. And if you want to say stuff in relation to that.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Piper, we can hear you. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So there are a few things that I wanted to say because there's kind of a lot to address in that. Now I do want to say off the bat that I am not for gun control. I don't, even when people, pitch the idea of quote unquote common sense background checks, I have arguments against that. I don't necessarily agree with that. So I will say that, but I'm also not of the mind that simply giving a bunch of good guys guns is going to stop the quote unquote bad guys. And that's because it's not like statistically that doesn't work. So when people have guns and something like a mass shooting happens, then and they have the opportunity to take the person who's doing the mass shooting out. A lot of the time they don't do it because they're scared and they don't know what to do in that situation. Even if they have the training or whatever, it's that is a stressful situation where anybody is going to be hard pressed to step up and be the hero and take out the mass shooter. Now, generally, the solution of giving more people guns doesn't address the issue. The issue isn't that we don't have enough guns. The United States has the most guns per capita of any country, right?
They do.
So we have plenty of guns, right? And the guns that we have, I would add, are not going anywhere despite whatever legislation people call for. So the issue is not that we don't have enough guns in people's hands. The issue is something like violence in society is directly correlated generally with the level of social inequality, be it economic or in political power. And we are a very unequal society in the United States.
Hey, Ashley, we can
hear the statistics about.
Sorry.
We always hear the statistics about 1% of the people owning the lion's share of all wealth, and so on and so forth, more than the bottom, more than the bottom 40% put together, statistics like that. And there's also the fact that in political power terms, there is pretty much no equality either, because the policies that, so the government policy and how the government acts, those things are not dictated by, the mass of people. They're dictated by specific moneyed interests that have a lot of wealth that they can throw at buying candidates and buying policy. So I think that's where you have to look to actually address the issue of gun violence and violence in society in general. And, sorry if I'm being a little bit long-winded, but I do want to say one thing before I stop. And when the issue of, asking what the kids think, the people who are actually victims of these mass shootings, and I would include the teachers in that and the school faculty, because they are also right. So when that was brought up, I'm not sure, aircraft base.
That was me.
Oh, aircraft Sparky. There you go. Sorry.
Yes. Just call me Sparky. It's fine.
Okay, Sparky. So you said, "Oh well, I'm a military veteran. I do not need to take into account the opinions of a bunch of children." Well,
yes, and
I'm sorry.
Can I respond real quick to that? Okay, I'm not trying to be mean.
I can actually make my point.
Mike, you go ahead. You go ahead, Mike. You can respond in a second, Sparky.
Yeah. So, anyway, the point that I was trying to make.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So the point that I just wanted to make quickly about that is, I'm sorry, but those are the people who are getting, shot and killed. So I think you do have to listen to the opinions of a bunch of children. I'm done now.
Take it away, Mike.
Hi. Okay, so I have a lot of opinions about all this. First of all, the whole good guy. I've already kind of said it. Good guy with a gun beats bad guy with a gun. No, that's just a platitude that I don't see any substantial evidence for. So I think that's kind of stupid. I'm sorry if I don't mean to say that about anyone, but I think that's a stupid sentiment. Giving guns to teachers, again, it's the good guys with guns thing. I think that's stupid. Why would you? You say about training and stuff, but like I said before, the training doesn't necessarily do that. And then again, you're introducing guns to a classroom. So what happens when a teacher accidentally shoots a student? You know, I mean, there's all these complications that go along with that.
Mike, your audio.
We can't hear you, Michael. Yeah, I don't know. We can't hear you.
Yeah, Mike, your audio cut out for some reason.
You dropped out, buddy.
Oh, no.
No.
Hello.
There you go.
Brilliant. Right.
Hello. Hi. Hello.
You're back. You're back.
I can hear you now.
Keep going
Did
from.
you hear any of that, or did I just?
You heard up to the point where you said a teacher will accidentally shoot a student, I think.
Okay. Yeah. So that thing. The gun-free zones being a target for stuff. New Zealand and Australia are both gun-free, and we don't have any mass shootings. And I know people say like, oh, well, they're different countries, such and such. I'm not saying my opinion isn't that we should get rid of all the guns or that you should get rid of all the guns. To begin with, I think that there needs to be some common sense regulations, though, because currently it's just like, nope, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to solve any problems. We're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. I think there needs to be some common sense regulation. The whole idea that going against the Constitution is going against the God-given right of the American people, I think that's stupid as well. There are amendments in the Constitution. The Constitution can be amended because it's been 200 years since the Constitution was written. Guns have changed. The gun laws need to change. And the other thing that I was going to say was guns as deterrence. Again, I live in a house. We don't have any guns. Other people don't have guns. There are people in New Zealand who have guns, but there are regulations. You have to have a gun cabinet. You have to have a license. You can't have assault rifles. You just have like, your hunting rifle. So you can go out, go hunting. You can kill animals if that's your thing, but no one goes around. Like, I can't think of a time when anyone's been shot in New Zealand ever. And since the hardcore gun regulation was introduced in Australia after the Port Douglas mass shooting, no mass shootings, zero. So I mean, gun control works. You can introduce certain things to deter gun violence, and adding more guns and adding more people with guns and things to the situation just makes it worse. Anyway, I needed to ramble. I need to go. I'm sorry. It was nice talking to you, Mr. Aircraft. That was all I needed to kind of say, but I've got to go and take my cat to the vet. So.
No problem.
All right, take care, my cat.
Bye, Michael.
See you later, team.
Adios.
Nice meeting you.
Right, so after Mike, we had American Anarchist. So take it away, Anarchist.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to bring up that much like Piper being a leftist, I'm not really in favor of like gun control, especially historically in America. It has really only ever targeted people who are more likely to be the victims of said gun violence. So, but I tend to be very skeptical of the idea that, honestly, a lot of what I was thinking was kind of covered by Piper, and I assumed that this would happen. But, I'm very skeptical of the idea that just introducing more guns or introducing more trained people with guns will help in the long run. And I think that there are some underlying problems not really related to the guns themselves. Like, I don't think taking away the guns is going to deal with the root problem either. I think that the root problems have to do with stuff like, social alienation and, I feel that we teach a lot of people, teaching people that they might be more like entitled to specific things socially, and then they come into the real world and they realize that that isn't actually the case, and also, like I said, social alienation, I think, is really a big deal, and that's something that we definitely need to learn how to, we as a society need to basically, I think that we as a society need to learn how to, treat people better, and, teach better, basically teach people some more,
empathy?
I'm trying to think of the word for it, but, just, I think that it's more of a radical change in society. I think this coincides with stuff like capitalism and stuff like,
yeah.
I think that radical change in the system is what needs to happen. And it's not even really related to the guns, but more. But I think it's much more of a social problem. I think that's what's really the root of these mass shootings.
Yeah,
and
because,
see, I'll agree with you. I will so agree with you right there.
You can have to say your piece in a second. Just it's next. It's some random geek. So it's getting through everyone.
No problem. So there's one thing I haven't brought up. I don't think has been brought up. Okay, the libertarian idea of like just give more people guns and properly train them and something like that in case of like a mass shooting. Okay, but the problem is that if you got a bad guy with a gun starts shooting someone, and then you have a good guy with a gun start shooting at that guy, or other good guys thinking I'll be the good guy start shooting the gun, then you got the problems like who do know where the logistical problem of who shot what at what time, where the bullets hit, and there also the potential of collateral damage of trying to be a hero with be the good guy with the gun. So that's why I have a problem with that idea of like give more people guns or give her the gun-free zone and stuff like that. And I have my complicated views on the guns. In my opinion, it would be great if like we can get rid of guns, but I know that that's unrealistic in this country. Unfortunately, it's the reality of the world that people have guns and people feel entitled to have the guns and stuff like that. Okay, and there's definitely arguments that for people who are marginalized do or feel more disempowered that the guns good safety for them. And yeah, so I'm not going to be advocating for get rid of all guns, but at least like some legislation against AR-15s. Why do we need? You don't need a semi-automatic rifle to do hunting. People can hunt. I have no problem with that. So people can have hunting rifles and stuff like that. But AR-15s, I don't see the point of that and stuff like that. So yeah, and yeah, mental illness is not the subject either. And if people are serious about the mental illness, it should be free and available to anyone in this country and easily be accessible for anyone, so that if mental health problems is the problem, I'm not saying it is, if that is the problem, then people can easily get mental health resources to possibly help in that regard. So that's some of my things, and I'll let the next person go.
Okay. So just quickly, Ted, Wolf, or Ashley, if you want to respond before I say something, because you didn't say initially that you wanted to say anything, but I just want to check to make sure.
Yeah, Ted.
My bit's totally quick. Am I gonna get on screen?
You're on screen now.
Yeah.
I wasn't on my screen, but I'll just go anyway. The more guns argument, the other trouble is the more guns there are, the more psychological pressure everyone's under. Like, even the good guys in inverted commas, something's gonna go wrong. People are gonna make a mistake when there's that many guns involved. So I think that's another reason why the good guys should have guns argument falls flat.
Yeah, I agree.
No, exactly. And Wolf, you were going to say something as well?
Yeah, I agree with what Rose said. There's a big issue when it comes to alienation, and some people are bringing up mental illness. And it's it is a thing that's a problem that's on Twitter when we bring it up, because that's very alien to people with the regular type of diseases like depression, anxiety, all those type of things. Like you could stretch it if it was something to do with someone with a there could be a particular extreme personality disorder like sociopathic type pathology. I mean, maybe that's like somewhere along the lines, but it's just I think we go down a rabbit hole a little bit if we go down one thing because there's a lot of different skills. I mean, some people bring up toxic masculinity, and there could be something because that's to do with the socialization and some of the things, and that's sort of unprismed. But then I guess we've got to look at it through multiple prisms, and the more that we have, and the more we can kind of illuminate the problem.
Yeah, no, I agree, certainly. And Ashley, did you want to say anything before I say my sort of response?
I just wanted to say on the issue of mental health. Mental health. It may have some connection to these mass shootings. It may not, but I do want to point out that I think the mental health argument is connected, at least tangentially, to the concept of toxic masculinity, because as was part of my exchange with Mr. Elam, as I kind of explained in that exchange, part of toxic masculinity is teaching men and boys to keep their emotions, bottle their emotions, and not express them freely and healthily. And speaking as a person, well, obviously not a man, but a person who has depression and has suffered from anxiety and suicidal ideation, even recently, I can say from experience that bottling your emotions doesn't help. It only makes it worse. Not expressing it makes it worse. And statistically, I've found that men are less likely to seek therapy and counseling if they need it, or like medication or even diagnosis. So that's definitely worth discussing. And again, I'm not for gun control, and I do see the things that American Anarchist was talking about how gun control has mostly been used to keep guns out of the hands of people in marginalized groups who are more likely to be victims of violent crime. In fact, I've on my public Facebook page, I've shared stories of LGBTQ plus gun rights groups. So, like, I'm not anti-gun totally, but I do think these are I believe Lonely Wolf said this. I agree that we should be listening to. I'm going to reiterate: we should be listening to the kids because they're the victims. They were there. They saw friends of theirs and teachers of theirs die. So yes, you don't just say you're a kid. Who cares what you think? It's like because they matter.
Agreed.
Okay. Thank you, Ashley. And now I get to say my bit after all of you have gone. Right. So fundamentally, I think that with the ideas about guns, we need to be addressing more than just the guns themselves, but the culture that they exist in. So, like Anarchist and Piper said, and Ashley and Wolf touched on, you need to be looking at the fact that we live in a society.
Just gonna say, Owen, you can call me Rose.
Oh,
in fact, Troy already has.
Okay, then. Yeah, well, like Rose and Piper.
Sorry.
Yeah. So, like Rose and Piper were saying, we live in a society, or in America, they have a society that has deep systemic problems. So, like they said, if you just put a gun control law in, like that's not going to address the people who are largely doing these shootings, but rather be an excuse for the police to go into predominantly black communities and really ramp up the oppression on them. It's going to be an excuse for the police to crack down on targeted individuals to, continue the systemic oppression of the state onto the people, in the name of capitalism and stuff. So, you need to be observing the societal factors that contribute to the problems, like toxic masculinity, as you mentioned, Ashley, and like the problems with regulation that we're seeing, where it's not really doing a very good job of making things better. But with that, you obviously got to analyze that guns themselves, just adding more of them, isn't really a very good idea, because like Ted was saying, the idea that you can just throw in, all this training and all these extra guns and firearms into places isn't going to help anything. What if someone makes a mistake due to the added pressure of there being guns everywhere? What if something goes wrong? And that goes on wrong all the time. I'm sure we've all seen videos of accidental shootings and stuff. I remember a pretty horrific one of a young girl fully firing a automated weapon into their gun instructor. Like, if that happens in a controlled environment, like a gun range, I mean, what do you think is going to happen in an environment with loads of children who, many of whom, like, you know, they're wild, like crazy things, like young kids. It takes a lot of lots of people don't understand how much effort goes into teaching a class full of children. Like, it's hard enough getting them to sit down and concentrate. Imagine having like a gun. Some kids, they'll, you know, be throwing pens around and like being a nuisance with anything they can get their hands on. Imagine if like one busy morning a gun's just left out, or it's left in a place that can be accessed by the kids, and you know that's going to happen at some point because teachers, like, they're not always going to be 100% on the ball. So to take isolated incidents and say, yeah, we need to do X, Y, Z without thinking about the wider societal context is futile, in my opinion, because we need to really understand that in our capitalist society, there's more problems than just one select field. And we can't understand the problems with gun culture in America without understanding the problems of capitalism on top of that, and with masculinity on top of that. So, yeah, to conclude, I think Piper and Rose had it right by saying that we need to, rather than saying, yeah, we need gun control, we need to be saying we need to address the core problems with American society and with society at large, which is, in my and many others' opinion, capitalism. And the way we sort of engage ourselves within this system and how it manifests in atrocities like mass shootings. And I will let Sparky finally get to reply to the like 8 or so people who've said stuff to him now.
Okay. And sorry if I accidentally broke into anyone. First of all, American Anarchist Rose touched on something that actually is one of my big talking points. It's cultural. It is more of a cultural issue than it is truly a gun issue. What is acceptable today versus what was acceptable 20, 30 years ago have completely changed. I remember when I was going to school, we had a couple drive-bys, and, you know, after a while, people actually thought that it was okay. It was actually glorified by the media and such. So we're really looking at the breakdown of the Western culture as I see it. You see people glorifying these acts of violence when it doesn't really need to be. The mental health issue is actually something I am concerned with, because mental health is on the decline of mental health is on the rise in the Western world. I don't know if I could blame capitalism. I don't really understand the tie between capitalism and mental health and all this other stuff. But hey, I'm sure I'll get to hear more of that down the road. Here is a hard fact: 11.6 people per 100,000 are killed in America by cars in auto accidents, where only 4.8 per 100,000 people are killed by guns. It is amazing that if a suicide bomber blows himself up in a crowded field, we blame the bomber and not the bomb. If a drunk driver plows through people, we blame the driver and not the car. Yet if someone pulls a trigger on a gun, for some reason, people want to blame an inanimate object. It makes no sense. Ted, I do agree with you, my man. The problem with more guns is that there is a chance for more confusion. Addressing the deal about training. When it comes to training, how do you think the military actually does all their maneuvers? They train until it becomes second nature. People who are in armed professions, that's what they do in their free time, just for fun, because they don't want to make those mistakes. So, I mean, it would take an actual effort by the teachers if they were, you know, to become concealed carry class 3 cleat certified, which class 3 certification means that they would be able to conceal carry as well as carry non-lethal weapons such as tasers and stuff. Not everything has to be responded to with a bullet. And the reason why I say that I don't want to allow children to set policy, okay, I have no problem listening to them and their concerns, but however, children don't understand enough about the law to really enact policy decisions. It's nothing against their experiences, but if they don't even have the basic knowledge to comprehend why some of these ideas won't work, really you can't take their ideas that seriously. It's just it's a basic knowledge. It's a knowledge gap is really all it is. It's nothing against them. It's just they don't have the life experiences. I have been in combat. I've seen the chaos of war, and it is scary. But with proper training, you can get through it. It is not just guns that mass killings happen with. Saturday in China, 33 was killed by a knifeman. One guy, one knife, lots dead. So really, with proper training, almost anything can be extremely deadly to many people at the same time. I'm not sitting there going, oh, well, they're the same, because they're not. Let's be honest. This kid was trained on how to use the weapon. I have no problem with that. I believe that children should be taught on proper, safe use of firearms. But this person took that knowledge and bastardized it by pulling the fire alarm inside of a school, forcing people to leave a school, which gave him a nice kill window, and he shot people. This person, I believe, does have some mental deficiencies, although there's really no record that has been 100% proven, still waiting on the police records. Yes, there is a problem in America. I believe it's mostly cultural. I believe that many people here will agree that there is a cultural problem in America. I would actually say that it's kind of an umbrella thing going on in the West. Is it capitalism? I'll argue no, but I think it's more of a lack of standards on the populace itself. Thank you.
No problem, Sparky. So we come to that time again when we need to decide an order for who's going to go when. So I suggest we go in reverse order this time, so that maybe Ashley, Wolf, or Ted wants to go first, and then we work our way down in order there. So who would like to go first out of you three, if anyone?
Well, if no one's picking it up, I'd like to say something.
Okay, so firstly, you, Geek, then after Geek, who would like to go?
I'll go second.
All I'm going to say is that I've said my piece on this issue, so...
Okay. We'll
until we change issue,
yeah. Brilliant, Rose. Alright, so that leaves Wolf, Ashley, Piper, and... I'll go last again, because I feel as though, as the sort of host, I shouldn't really be talking over everyone else.
I really don't have anything else to say on this issue. I said what I needed to.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ashley. So now it's just Wolf and Piper. You two the same as...
Yep. I'll be short and sweet.
Sorry, Wolf?
I guess I have something short, but I guess specific to say. So
okay. So you can go after Ted, Piper, and then Wolf, you want to go fourth? Or... Brilliant. All right, and then I'll go after Wolf. Take it away, Geek.
Okay, so yes, it's true that a lot of people do die and get injured by cars, but that's kind of a necessity. We use that more than just harming people. So that's one point to that. And well, guns, you could use it for protection. So, but I don't know. It's just I feel like the use of the gun is compared to the use of the car is just not equivalent. So I don't think we can compare to stats of the harm that's done by cars to the harm that's done by guns. Let's see. Now it is. I do kind of agree there's a cultural problem, but it's multifaceted, and I think capitalism is part of that because with capitalism, we are living in a dog eat dog world, and we live in that dog eat dog world because of capitalism. We have to look out for just ourselves and not look out for others, and that's a broad point, but I think that's part of the whole debate and stuff like that. So I'll leave it off of there and let Ted go next.
But I get the analogy that it's exactly the same as being in the war. Soldiers in the war, they're there for combat. That is their one purpose. Where someone in the classroom, they're not meant to kill bodies. that should only be an extraordinary, awful scenario, and they can never be trained for that in the same way soldier can, if that makes sense.
It does, actually. It does make a lot of sense. Good point, Ted.
Brilliant, yeah. Piper, you said you had a succinct point.
Yeah. This has to do with the listening to children thing. I don't know necessarily what you mean by children setting policy. I do think that children, since they, do not have the rounded experience that adults have. I mean, obviously everyone thinks that there are things that children should not be allowed to do that adults can do because they are more experienced. They have their brains are developed fuller, etc. Right? So I get that point, but I don't. But I will say that that it's not that doesn't mean that children, when you're setting policies that specifically affect them, that they should just be they should just passively adhere to those policies, right? I think that's totally wrong. I think as human beings, they have the basic right to have some input into the policies that affect them. And if people want to object with the idea that children are too stupid to have any input, well, I would say that that's not true. That's because, and I would say that that's because there are different models of schooling that, different models of schooling that we don't use in general in, the West or really anywhere else, that are actually based on the input of the children that go to the school, and where they make a lion's share of the decisions, even about, let's say, discipline. That model is called free schooling, or democratic schooling, and that does exist. There's a democratic school in Britain. I don't remember the name of it, but so that model actually gives these children a say in the policies of the school, and it runs, it runs just as smoothly as anything else. So I think the idea that, children are, not saying anyone necessarily said this, but children are stupid, therefore they should have no input. I think that's wrong. I think they actually can and should have a great deal of input.
Brilliant. So I believe it was Wolf next.
Yep. Yeah, so I guess the topic that comes up sometimes, we hear a lot of terminology comes up on Twitter when we say the word toxic masculinity, and I think it's one of those unfortunate side effects of when there's a certain term that might circulate in academia to describe something that's because we can describe it in everyday language, but unfortunately some things do filter down through the academic and lands into the lap of the general consciousness, and yeah, that's when you look at the actual term itself, it explains some of the sociological aspects of certain ways in which men can suffer, and I can say that. I mean, I don't necessarily identify as a feminist or an MRA. Like, I probably fit more in the lines of men's liberation rather than MRA, because I'm sort of opposed to that Paul Elam wing of that. So it's an issue that I probably talked about anyway without even realizing that I was using that word anyway. So it's not a scary term for those people who are like the non-feminists or whatever. It's sort of not too bad. I mean, some people can weaponize the word and use it in the wrong context or something like that. And yeah, that's sort of where I'm coming from, because I still talk a lot to men's issues. That's what I do on my channel a lot of the time, and to sort of include, I guess, trans men issues as well. So that's the advantage in the men's movement. There's more, like, men's liberation is starting to gain more momentum. So like what I've been trying to do with my channel, it's kind of a positive thing. We're seeing that a lot of other men's groups are coming up on Twitter, and yeah, it's a better it's sort of a much better model of sort of looking at particular men's issues rather than that e-labeling, because there's a lot of ways that he's screwed over men as well as women.
Yeah. Just a heads up, Wolf, your audio in that last segment there was a little bit tinny or something. I'm not sure what was.
I was all over the place then when I tried to make a point.
Oh no, the point was fine. It was more the audio. I don't know what it was, but
yeah. So if you see, because I know that MRA like that usually leaves a sour taste, but if you see the usually the word men's liberation or masculinism, those are the two words that it's more along the lines of what I advocate for. So it's a bit more healthier. So it's an alternative to MRA that doesn't necessarily have that kind of grievance, that kind of bitterness that comes with the mainstream MRA. That kind of it's unpalatable to me, that ELAM stuff.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Also, Ashley, so sorry about that. So I think you mentioned something about toxic masculinity. So I think I read somewhere that it's not just men who can suffer that, because I know it kind of makes sense that women could suffer the same thing as well, because it's when we mix around their gender roles, etc. Like theoretically, it could affect both men and women, like the same kind of things that men may suffer will happen to women as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, like issues do affect everyone rather than just an individual group. So I believe I come next. I'll try and be quick, because I think we should probably start to move forward from the gun issue, because I get the impression we'll be here all night if we just continue on this topic. We should probably save it for more focused discussions on it and stuff. And certainly, if we want to continue at another point, then we can do that. But anyway, yeah, I'll just try and wrap up. Once again, some pretty good points were made. Ted, you mentioned that the teachers and soldiers have different roles in society, and that's pretty a good place to start. Like the idea of just having people just suddenly take on entire new training courses away from their specialized field to spend time learning how to fire a gun for this potential threat is not only really harmful to both to their profession, like they're diverting time away from doing what they should be doing for help their job, to a subject they shouldn't really have to do in the first place. We want to be in a position where we're saying, how can we stop the problem, rather than saying, how are we going to place a plaster over the problem? Like, we don't want to be sort of addressing the ways we can make teachers stop the attack from being as deadly. We want to be saying, no, we want the attacks to stop. So let's think about how we're going to do that. So it's more, prevention is better than cure. Then you said, Piper, with about kids and stuff, and I think that it's silly to interpret this as, we want kids to literally be making our decisions for the country and stuff. The point that you're making, and which I agree with, is that they have they've got to be considered in the decisions of the nation, because they have autonomy as people. They're human beings. So the fact that people are going into schools and like shooting up the entire place and killing people who are just starting life is abhorrent, and shows fundamental problems in society, especially as it's been going on for decades now. Because there are people who survived Columbine, and now, instead of seeing real change in society, they're instead seeing another generation go through the same stuff and lose people who could have lived amazing lives and lost their right to life because of someone with a gun. And really, I think that, as I was saying earlier, guns themselves, they do have a role in society. They can have a role, but the fact there's so many of them in areas where they shouldn't be, and in scenarios where they're being used to inflict harm onto people, is part of a wider problem. And to come back to what you were saying, Sparker, I believe there is a problem in the West and in the world as a whole. And I think, again, it is capitalism at core, because it's easy to sort of figure it as, the lefties just going against it, but we've got to really think about why there are these problems in society. You mentioned mental health, and you look at the way society is, where workers are forced into selling their labor or they have no access to the elements of life they need to survive and then promptly starve, that's going to make people unhappy. We look at the way we're it's a toxic masculinity. We're taught about men and women, the way society conditions us to view the world, the air of entitlement some men have. And you look at someone like the shooter, and that is resembled in that. And the fact that he gets that impression of society, and he feels that he needs to act in that way, is born of a certain social conditioning. There's always more to every element in society than initially meets the eye. And to suggest that you can just compare one stat to another. So you mentioned deaths per car and deaths per guns per 100,000 people. I find that to be a little bit almost naive, really, because like Geek said, cars are used more frequently. And again, even that you can apply to capitalist critique, because you could say that, oh well, if there weren't if society was run by everyone, you could have a transport system that benefits everyone rather than just everyone having their own car and doing what they want with it, and thus being forced to sort of go from place like you look at the work system where you have to sell your labor hours, but you're gonna have to drive to work, so you might be in a rush because you don't want to be late, and promptly you're going to take risks, which leads to deaths. You look at the number of people who get sidetracked in their car, either on the phone or by smoking or by doing anything really, and causing crashes that way. You look at the way cars are built, where lots of developers and producers, they want to build cars as cheaply as possible to maximize profits. So suddenly their cars aren't as safe and are more likely to break down or crash or be unsafe on the road, and thus cause more accidents. There's always more to every single facet of society that we can attribute to the conditions placed upon it. So to draw us back to guns, whilst the gun rate, the gun deaths per 100,000 people may be lower than other things, the fact that stuff as horrific as a load of kids being shot up in a school is happening so frequently in America is something that needs to be discussed, and it's a part of a wider issue with culture in America and under capitalism. And I want to sort of move on from this sort of point, though I feel as though we all have more to say. I don't know if you wanted to say anything briefly, Sparky, but if you could try and keep it relatively concise, I suppose.
Before we end the point, I just want to say one thing. I swear, officer, I was not smoking any weed. You said smoking in the car, so that just immediately came to my head.
Honestly, the only thing that I want to touch on is Geek mentioned how I talked about cars and how cars and guns are basically two different things, not really anything all that comparable. And I counter with this. The only reason why I brought it up is because it's an inanimate object. Okay, there's actually more guns in America than there are vehicles, and yet vehicles attribute to way more deaths per 100,000. And I'm just looking at statistics, and I know that they're not used to kill. But the only reason why I brought up cars was because of they're just a tool. That's all they are. A gun is a piece of machinery. The gun itself has not really evolved much since, honestly, 1950s, 1960s. The only thing that's really upgraded in guns recently has been ammunition. There are some things called smart ammunitions. But that's way too deep to get into. But man, great talk. Thank you for at least giving me the opportunity, not completely calling me an idiot out on this. This seems to be an actually decent conversation. I appreciate that.
Excellent. You sound like you're about to go, Sparky.
Oh no. Just
okay,
honestly, the civility of this honestly kind of surprised me.
Okay.
And I'm just being honest. I'm not putting any. I've done streams with Lonely Wolf. I know that I've seen streams between Lonely Wolf and Random Geek. And me and you, we've gone back and forth here and there on Twitter, but we really have never talked to each other. I haven't had the pleasure of being in a room with Ted or American Anarchist, and I'm sorry. I know I'm leaving Piper, and I'm leaving someone else out.
Ted.
Ashley.
Ashley, yes, Ashley. I haven't been in a room. I haven't been in a discussion with y'all, and I really appreciate how we've been civil. I've enjoyed it.
As I said before, you've let yourself down because you haven't ironed your sheets in the background.
But when I throw up the green screen stuff, it looks amazing. So it's non sequitur, bro.
Well, indeed, civility and pleasantness is what I intend, hopefully, on these streams. Did anyone else want to kickstart the new topic or the new area of discussion?
I'm not sure how much of a topic could be made out of this, but you know, I discovered something today, or I discovered that it was a big thing today. I did find a few examples of it a couple days before, but Google Nestor Machno is a thing, and I think that's pretty interesting.
Oh,
Google what?
You know,
the
Nestor Machno, Ukraine 1918, I think. Yeah, you know,
Okay,
free territory of Ukraine.
Let me explain.
Piper
this
knows
because
much more about it than I do, but
this is the topic that I'm obsessed with. So, Nestor Makhno was a Ukrainian anarchist. He was born in a village called Hastily, and he was born into a peasant background. He worked on the land of big landlords in Ukraine. This was before the Russian Revolution, so there was still a lot of kind of peasantry in the country, and big landlords who exploited that peasantry. So he worked on the land of those landlords, and he also worked as an industrial worker for a period of time in a factory in Ukraine. And he got involved with anarchism as a political movement. His first involvement with anarchism as a political movement was with a group of anarchists who would steal things from wealthy individuals and give them away to poor individuals. And for this activity, he was thrown in jail, and he lived a pretty bitter existence in jail. He was left in solitary and freezing temperatures. He had to eat rodents to survive. And while in jail, he met someone who actually, wrote a very long book about Nestor Makhno and the things that he did in Ukraine, called Peter Arshinov. And Peter Arshinov was much better kind of intellectually trained in anarchism. He knew the theorists of anarchism better and the theory of it better. And he kind of was Makhno's mentor in kind of anarchist thought. And he taught, Makhno, the anarchist theory that he knew. And then once the Russian Revolution happens, a bunch of, it spreads to Ukraine, the jails are destroyed, and the prisoners are set free. And then, as such, Makhno, escapes. Makhno and Peter Arshinov escape. Makhno goes back to his hometown of Halipol. And then within the Russian Revolution that had reached to Ukraine, he starts to organize, an army of peasants. And this army of peasants would go on to expropriate the large landlords, take their land, and make it commonly owned by all peasants. And he created, this peasant army, which was known as the Makhnovishchina, was, it created in Ukraine a fairly large society of communes where, basically the society was organized collectively in a kind of non-oppressive, non-exploitative manner. People generally had equal power. This may be this may sound ideological as an explanation, but it's my reading of it. So, and as such, he kind of created he and his movement created an instance where oppressed people kind of took power and organized things for themselves and started to demolish their oppression and exploitation and create a better society. There's and militarily, the last thing I'll say about it is that militarily, his peasant army, the Maknovishchina, was also very, it wasn't militarily inept. They cultivated a guerrilla kind of military style, which was prefigurative of other kind of successful military, guerrilla military, forces such as those of Mao Zedong. So, and he, this success, this kind of effective military force was able to fight off, the combined forces of the Ukrainian nationalists or the Petrolorists and the White Army, which was the reaction to the Russian Revolution, which was trying to reinstate, the Tsarist regime. And also, and the Bolsheviks, who are now in power after the Russian Revolution, and the colonial kind of occupation forces of Austria and Germany that were invading Ukraine at the time. And I could go on about this and nerd out about it for like fucking 2 days. I'm not going to do that though, because I don't want to bore people any further. But yeah, that's basically what that is. If you don't know what that is.
So yeah, that sounds cool. This is the first time I'm learning about all of this, but that sounds really cool. So thank you for sharing that.
I mean, even if you're not someone, even if you're not someone,
sorry, go ahead, right.
Even if you're not like someone who really would, even if you're not someone who would like agree with the guy politically, I think that he's just a pretty historically important figure. Like, it's a very interesting part of history that I don't think we're really taught in schools, that I wish we were taught more about.
It's the sort of thing I think should be a link in the... after this Hangout is finished, I'll put a link to it in the description, because it sounds like the sort of thing that would be quite interesting to read about, definitely. I
could recommend... I could recommend, like, tomes of literature on it, so...
Excellent. Yeah. But no, I think it's important to look back at the past and look at where our ideas can stem from sometimes, and how elements of them can go well, and elements of them can sadly not succeed as well. So, for instance, with that, I think it's important to look at the key ideals that were initially sort of thought about. Land being collectively owned, the abolition of class, and the sort of freedom of the working class from the ruling class. However, we need to also learn that to try and implement this in a confined space and not globally is probably not going to work, because you're not going to see the ruling classes of other nations say, oh well, let's just let this classless society exist. They're going to think, oh well, if this society exists and is working all right, then what's the potential future for us? What if people here in our nation say, well, actually, no, there's no reason we should be subject to this class system. There's no reason we should continually sell our labor to allow you to live a life of luxury. And, it's in their best interest to then quash the potential society in Ukraine. And as we've seen over time in Catalonia, for instance, it's always been the case where these societies don't last particularly long. Or the Paris communes, for instance, where imperialist forces have gone in and stomped out the dissenting anarchists and dissenting communists and stuff. So we need to have a global revolution, really, of the system, because we can't coexist with a system that actively needs a class system, actively needs exploitation to thrive. And I think subsequently that's why a lot of ideas surrounding and a lot of critiques of like communism and stuff and of far left ideas are so poor, because a lot of them, you hear people say, oh, if you don't like capitalism, just move to your own country or start your own land. And it's like, well, you're sort of missing the point, really, because you're ignoring the ideas that we have about class and about capital and about the inherent structuring and faults of capitalism in order to make your pretty baseless statement about it, like, oh yeah, just go and start your own society. Like, what do you think is going to happen when people find a plot of land and say, right, we want communally owned like stuff here? Like, firstly, you got to find land, and like secondly, how are you going to like trade and stuff if all the modes of like production, if all the resources in society are owned by capitalists? How are you not going to be involved in capitalism? How are you going to get your resources and technology if you're not getting it from previous like capitalist owned goods and stuff? So obviously that society isn't able to come to fruition whilst capitalism is existing. Like, we've got to realize that it's like with a imagine like your house was infested with ants. If you spray one room, you're not gonna, like, yeah, fine, you've made that room better, but the ants are gonna come back if you don't deal with all of them. Like, it's the same thing. Capitalism is a infection, really, to well, not wanting to sound too fanatical or anything, but it is. It's a problem that has to be completely eradicated if you're going to fix the problem, because you can't have it in parts. Sorry to ramble on there. If anyone else would like to.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. The thing about that, in conjunction with the Paris Commune or Spain in 1936, is that those. Oh, excuse me. I burped a little bit when I said that. That was graceful. Anyway, so the thing with that is that when you look at, so what you're looking at when you study those, kind of examples, is you're looking at situations in which, as I kind of said before, oppressed people who are exploited by the existing system, and the people that benefit from it. You're seeing those people take control of society for the first times in history, and starting to change society in such a way that they are no longer oppressed and exploited. And the people that benefit from the existing system obviously don't want that to happen. They want the existing system to stay in place. They want to keep exploiting those people, for their own benefit, because they exist at the top of the system, and so they have no interest in seeing it, leave, become, be relegated to history. So they fight back against that revolutionary change. In the case of Makhno, he was eventually put, his peasant army was eventually put down by the Bolsheviks. This started with the fact that Makhno did not want to be subjugated to the Bolsheviks geopolitically. The Bolsheviks wanted Makhno to be under the command of the Red Army in the fight against the Whites, and he, would not capitulate to that. But over time, it became, a little bit more than that, in the sense that the Bolsheviks, after the Russian Revolution, had set up more or less the same, capitalist society. They had set up a society where there was a class which owned, the tools that are used to produce things, and as such, the vast majority of people did not own any of those things, and were divested of, the power to, produce, to utilize those tools to produce what they need to survive. And as such, to do so, they had to work under the people who owned those tools and get, in exchange for that, an income. And then what they produced with those tools would go to that class of people. And in the case of Russia, after the Russian Revolution, that class of people was no longer individual kind of capitalists that own individual enterprises like it is in the United States today. But it was, the state and party bureaucracy of the Bolshevik Party, which controlled the state, which had nationalized all production and land. Makhno created more or less the opposite of that, where there was there was a real change in society, the social relations of society, and there was no longer, a ruling class which exploited the vast majority of people, at least, where Makhno's forces controlled territory and were reshaping things. And so they presented a model that was, in that sense, much more attractive and much more revolutionary than anything the Bolsheviks had created. And so, the Bolsheviks couldn't let that stand.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, the idea that I think actually you touched on a really important issue, which is that when you've got a power system, it's in the best interest of those who have power to maintain their power. Hence, the Bolsheviks, as the ruling party and thus technically the political ruling class, did not want a anarchist society, a system where class has been completely abolished, to come to fruition. I think it's important, really, when a lot of people say, "Oh, communism doesn't work because of the, let's just look at Soviet Russia," and to say that is to ignore the actual scenario in Russia, where you had a clear class system, clearly not worker ownership of the means of production, clearly not basic tenets of the system described being met, and it's really dishonest of people to continually say when people say, "Oh, we want worker ownership of society," to say, "Oh, well, it doesn't work. Just look at countries X, Y, Z." When these countries are clear examples of the kind of society we want to move on from. The idea that we need a class-tiered system to survive. The idea that people aren't capable of thinking for themselves and need to be managed by the state. We want to move on from this, but because of the way capitalists have, not capitalists, but ruling class, I suppose, have built the system. Certainly in America, we're you're sort of educated to think against that, to say, "Oh, the bad Russians, they control everyone and no one has any freedom." But here in America, you're free, and under capitalism, you've got freedom to do anything you like. And people buy into that narrative, despite how clearly false it is. Like, "Oh yeah, you're free, but you've got nothing. You've got no house, no food, and oh look, a few people, these corporations, these rich people, they own all this. They own all the land and they own all the food. And if you want some, you're gonna have to buy some. And oh look, you've got nothing to trade. You've got no money. But lucky you, the capitalist is going to offer you some money if you sell your labor to them, and they can profit off you and make billions. And don't worry, you've got just enough to have some food and maybe pay your rent to a landlord, because you're not going to buy any land because that's all owned as well. Luckily, that makes the capitalist billions, whilst the workers are going to be barely getting by, because plenty of states in America don't even have a minimum wage, let alone a livable minimum wage. So your boss can pay you as little as they want, and that's essentially the reality of capitalism, where you've not got the freedom you're supposedly set out to because of the conditions that it crafts. Because capitalism is essentially the system that allows the ruling class to maintain their control. Like you look at various industries in America, like television. It's controlled by 5 companies, which is now 4 because Disney bought Fox. So it's like, if you want to enjoy television, you're making a choice between 4 companies. Like, that's rubbish. Cars, like, if you've got to subscribe to a certain model, like if you want a car, it's going to be from like one of a few things. Like if you want food, you can't choose an ethical food company, because chances are all the food you're going to be buying is from a company that has really bad environmental practices or mistreats their workers or pollutes the environment and stuff. Like, it's atrocious to expect any sort of real freedom under capitalism because you ignore the conditions that it naturally sets. So to draw this sort of ramble to a close and to sort of link us back to what Piper was saying, I think you're absolutely right in that the Bolsheviks certainly felt threatened by the idea of a society without class existing and sort of serving as a symbol of what could be achieved beyond what the Bolsheviks had set out for the USSR. But also, once again, that capitalism is the overarching problem with society, and whilst it exists, it's going to threaten any sort of talks of progress because it's against its nature to allow real freedom for every single autonomous human being.
Looks like Ashley wants to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, kind of tangentially related to that, how capitalism, and capitalism kind of exacerbates. We were kind of having a talk in our own little chat about veganism, started by me, of course. And I was actually starting to think about like how much veganism is impacted by how much veganism, and even a lot of vegans don't think of veganism as being like an anti-capitalist movement. Oh my god, I saw this page, the Libertarian Vegan. Of course, they meant they were libertarian capitalist. I'm a libertarian socialist, but anyway, they were kind of going on about how like the free market gave us all these really good vegan products, and that's why it's good, and blah blah blah. It's like it's such a reductionist worldview because like capitalism is what drives like animals to be killed at the rate they are and in the numbers they are, like so quickly, and like with so much worker exploitation and animals to like be bred to be deformed. My friend Maureen, a privileged vegan, actually has a video about ableism and animal rights that kind of talks about how animals are basically bred to be disabled. I encourage you guys to check out her channel. She's awesome. And yeah, like even like our consumer habits as vegans are like kind of impacted by that because like there are a lot of vegans who want to boycott all these companies after they get bought by like companies that also that are mainly producers of meat and dairy, like what Field Roast got purchased by Tyson, and way before that, Silk was purchased by White Wave, which is like a dairy producer. And like, there's an argument like a lot of libertarian vegans will make, like, well, it's the free market, use your dollar, but it's like that's there's a bigger issue here, like, and even like when you think about something like Food Empowerment Project talks about this a lot. Like even like vegan chocolate or vegan or just already vegan things like coffee and like produce, they can their market is cruelty free, but they often are involve slave labor and stuff like that. So like that's just another thing. And another way to like hide the unethical practices of these companies.
Basically, no matter where you go, you're finding fucked up shit.
Yeah.
Basically.
You know, yeah, like with coffee, there's like literal slave labor. You know, with human. Yeah, I mean, with guacamole, for example, the Mexican drug cartels are actually very. So, like, if you get avocados that are from Mexico, the drug cartels, that are in Mexico, which, you know, they have a great deal of political clout, you know, even though they're not technically legally, you know, It's a pretty fucked up situation there, but you know, a lot of the times they're basically extorting like a lot of the farmers of guacamole. So like, or not guacamole, of avocados.
Avocados, yeah.
So like if you're buying guacamole or you're buying avocados that are from Mexico, chances are some of that money is going to the drug cartels. You know, they're making it. You know, they're making money. You know. Somebody fucked up somewhere is making money no matter what you buy.
Yeah. And it's like
no ethical consumption under capitalism.
Exactly.
Can I interject here?
Yeah, sure.
One of the things people tend to overlook is the fact that if you really want to get into the ethical treatment of animals or ethical farming and stuff like that, if you really want to ensure that, buy your own land and do it yourself. It's not that hard. A lot of people have gotten away from doing things like vegetable gardening and stuff in their own yard. It is possible to do. It takes a little bit of work. Sure, it takes a little bit of time out of your day, you know, instead of playing Minecraft or whatever it is you do, you know, where you're sitting dead on your butt. You could be out there, you know, fertilizing or whatever, feeding your own chickens, taking care of that stuff. I see nothing wrong with that, honestly. I think more people need to learn a little bit self-reliance. Depending on the grocery store for everything and such is really a problem. That is why you have these mega corporations that come up. One thing that capitalism does that is vastly superior over communism is the fact that you can own your own land. In communism, everything is owned by the community, the state. And that leads to a lot of corruption. People are corrupt. It's going to happen. So anytime that you allow for any society to control every aspect of your life, there's going to be corruption that's going to come with it. Even in an anarchist society, eventually some group is going to get strong enough to take over and strong arm other people. So capitalism isn't perfect by any means, but I think as far as what exists in today's world, I personally believe it is the best because it does give you the more options. If you don't want to be a wage slave to corporations, then get you some education and set out on your own. That's something that you cannot do in capitalism. One thing I pointed out into the chat for those viewing is that the only difference between fascism and communism is the fact of who owns the land. In fascism, the private individual is allowed to own the land, where in communism, the state. And both the means of production are controlled by the community, aka the state. So that's really where your big that's your big differences there in those economic models. Now, that's not to say the social models; those are totally different, and that's something probably can be addressed in another deal. But honestly, get out there and grow something. It ain't hard. And
it's easy. It's easy for people who are able-bodied, though.
Yes, well, I mean, those who aren't able-bodied, they do have family members, they do have friends. I mean, let's be honest. What I truly see wrong in the West is the fact that we don't talk to our neighbors. Hey, geek, if you were my neighbor, I'd be sitting there going, "Hey, man, you need to borrow a cup of sugar or something." You know what I'm saying? You know, we're going to talk to each other, and if you're growing something and I'm growing something, man, we could rotate and we could help each other out.
That sounds like a commune to me.
It's part of a commune. But if you own your own land, then you can control your own means of sustainment.
I think
that's really what I'm talking about.
I think everyone probably has something to say in regards to what you were saying just then. But just to point out, just quickly before we all discuss the other stuff I said, no one's saying you can't own like a plot of land under communism. The problem is primarily
actually communism states you cannot own the land because it is owned by the communist.
It's the idea of a corporation or an entity saying, right, this island's mine, this farm is mine entirely. Like, no, there's enough space for everyone to like own a house, like a garden and stuff, where you could have a vegetable patch or something. No one's like saying that is the problem, because as societally like owned, therefore society has delegated you this bit of land to do stuff with, and if you want to have a little garden, then you can. What is being said, or what isn't allowed, is for you to profit off that land. So for you to take the labor of other people and then profit off it. So imagine you grow these vegetables and then someone else comes along and takes them and sells them and makes a fortune off that.
Okay, well, and that's a fair criticism. So let me pose this question to you. Owen, you're the big proponent for, I'm assuming, communism. Hold on. There we go. Thank you. Should you honestly weigh the skills and education of those who are like doctors equally to those who are high school dropouts? These are the things that needs to be considered, because honestly, if you do not value skills and training and education above those who do not pursue such things, then honestly you're advocating for slavery. If you're saying that there's no wages and you're saying that all their education, training, and stuff is worthless. So now you're going to force people to provide services sans equivalent compensation. Now, capitalism doesn't always do that. Okay, let's be completely honest. Doctors are sometimes underpaid depending on who they work for, but that may be by a choice of their own. As skilled labor may be under or overcompensated depending on where they are. I mean, but this is something that if everyone is equal and everyone gets the same thing, then what motivation is there to move towards betterment, to move towards higher goals? I'm sorry, but capitalism does offer the carrot. If you sit there and go, if you work hard, if you study, if you learn all this stuff, you get skills that all these other people don't have, you can ultimately live a more comfortable life. So, and that's something that I think is a true way to incentivize.
Okay. Well, I suppose you probably predicted this, but I fundamentally agree. I'm trying to be concise as I can because I suspect everyone else wants to say something in what's most likely going to be criticism of what you've just said.
And that's completely fine. There's nothing wrong with criticism.
Oh, of course. So I'll try and be as quick as I can. Let's see. Doctors, yeah, they do an important role in society, and no one's saying they're worthless. But the fact they do their job and it helps people does not mean that other people are then should be barred from being able to access, a home, healthcare, education, as we see under capitalism. Because a free market essentially says, oh well, these people who produce profit are entitled to the fruits of life or the necessities of life. That doctor is using tools created by other laborers. That doctor's education came through the labor of others. The doctor doesn't exist in a vacuum. Their labor and their role in society is not possible without the labor of everyone else who came before them. And to isolate them from the people who delivered their equipment, the person who trained them, the people producing their books they studied from, is to ignore the entire societal conditions that allow that doctor to become a doctor. So for them to then suddenly make a massive amount in a salary, whilst the rest of the workers who make their job possible are, living on minimum wage or less, living in miserable conditions, unable to escape their conditions, is fundamentally unfair. And you also have to consider that it's not like it's easy to say, oh, well, doctors should be paid more than everyone else because they're more important. But it's down to the free market. There's jobs like bin men, for instance. Imagine if there were no bin men and removal vans, and there's just rubbish everywhere on the streets, and there's this massive problem with waste. But they barely get paid anything. It's often seen as quite a low value job and a pretty unimportant role, waste management. But what happens to society if we just suddenly have all these problems? Look at food farmers and people who work on farms. Without their labor, all of a sudden your entire food network is falling apart because you've got this abundance of food just not able to go anywhere. Yet these roles are taken as low skilled, oh, you go here if you aren't very smart jobs. That's another example of if you didn't have this job, so much of society wouldn't be able to function. Yet because of capitalism's free market and because we've maximized profit off these jobs, we're seeing like these jobs being unable to sort of being paid much. You mentioned capitalism offering the carrot. Like, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's a false carrot because you have to sell your labor to your boss, who's in it's the boss's best interest to maximize profits off you. So, you know, you're not going to have a wage that allows you to do much with your capital apart from sell it to the capitalist who you're already, you know, selling your labor to. So to say, oh yeah, just get a plot of land, get some vegetables, start growing it. It's like, where's that time coming from? Because your time is going into selling your labor. And when it's not selling your labor to make money, it's eating or sleeping or anything else that essentially keeps you alive. You've maybe got a limited window of time to make this farm and plot of land, in which case you're like, you know, you don't want to be doing even more work. You want to be making like trying to enjoy your life, what little time you have to relax a bit. I think it's a little bit ignorant, really, of the conditions capitalism has to say, oh, you know, just work a little bit harder. I liked what you said earlier about people should talk to their neighbor. That's brilliant. That's what communists want, really. That's what we want as leftists, to make a society where people are happier. But that's antithetical to capitalism, where your time is being poured into making more capital from your capital. So a scenario where you speak to Geek, Sparky, and say, yeah, let's share our tools, let's help each other. That's not happening. The better capitalists would say, no, let's, you know, cut Geek off. Let's try and make our gardens better so that we make more profit and thus have a better life than Geeks. So, you know, our what we value as better behavior and, like, you know, nicer, you know, speaking to our neighbor and stuff, is what the capitalists of, you know, McDonald's, Nike, Adidas said, no, let's forget that. We want to make more money. And so that's why they're at the top of the food chain, because they've said, let's profit and exploit our labor as much as we can to make ourselves as wealthy as we can, which is why Nike workers, you know, they live in horrible sweatshops, literally on the sweatshop campus, because they have nowhere else to go and they can't leave their job, otherwise they'll starve. Meanwhile, Nike is worth billions and their CEOs like are some of the wealthiest people on the planet and stuff. The whole system is fundamentally corrupt and like broken because it's based on the exploitation of labor, the idea that people who do the work are merely commodities and their labor is a commodity to be profited off. And I'm very sorry for rambling on because I'm sure everyone else has stuff to say. So I'll let like, I don't know, Geek or anyone else chip in to this point.
I did want to like comment on something that Aircraft Sparky said, and like many other capitalists have said that, where they believe that you need to have like the incentives of money in order to do anything, like in science or in art and anything like that. And I do not agree with that at all. I mean, I used to agree with that, but in the last 2 years, or even just in the last year, I've kind of like changed my tune and said, no, not really. And in fact, I remember a TED Talk years ago. I got to like find this TED Talk where it's like the guy kind of like find like a scientific experiment where our thought experiment of like the candle trick and stuff like that. And it figured out that the money incentive for a kind of job that requires a lot of thinking, a lot of like abstract thought, a lot of engineer thinking and stuff like that, money incentive doesn't work. It just doesn't. And I believe that especially in the arts, the sciences, humanities, and engineering and stuff like that, there'll be enough people that will do it for the love of doing it. I mean, people think that like it's capitalism that created the iPhone, but yet many of the technologies like the GPS and like the touchscreens and all that stuff, those were created by state government funded projects. And so just for I believe that like science or any of those things, and even for pick up the garbage, there'll be people that don't mind pick up the garbage or love to pick up the garbage because it helps clean up the communities and stuff like that. And so there'll be people willing to do that. I do not believe that you need to pay people money in order to do things. If people are willing to do something, they'll be willing to do it, and they'll especially be willing to do it if they don't have to like spend 40 hours a week on a job that they don't like.
Quick response to that, Geek. Just to let you know, I'm an aircraft electrician. That's where my name came from. I can train almost anyone to do it. It's not a difficult job. Some of the principles behind it are quite abstract, but I mean, I can show real life ways to train people. That was a big part of my job. What makes me more highly paid than most people in the electrical field is the fact that if I make a mistake, I go to prison, because that plane kills everyone inside of it and possibly whoever it lands on. And by land, I mean crash. So, I mean, there's safety concerns, there's liabilities, and that's what I'm talking about. If there wasn't something to incentivized me to do it, I wouldn't do it. And I love fixing airplanes. I actually call it a hobby. I'm one of those people that have found a true calling in life. Things that I love to do. Aviation is something that I thoroughly enjoy. But not everyone has that option, and I don't know why they don't have that option. I don't fully comprehend it. I blame it on poor choices for some people. Others are just, hey, you're in a bad spot. You know, it's just you don't have means to get there. But I understand what you're saying. People who do love to do things are going to do them regardless of incentivification, but you're not going to be able to continue doing it if you can't live. And one of the biggest problems that I see, and I look at the American welfare system on this, is there's a lot of people who are just happy with the status quo. They're content. They may not be happy, but they're content. And so they don't try to push themselves beyond what they currently are. I left the workforce for 3 years so I could pursue a degree. I used my GI Bill benefits to do that. Thank you, Uncle Sugar, you know, for allowing me the chance to get that blank check. And fortunately for me, they didn't cash it in, you know, but because of that, I had that benefit to go to college for free. That option is open to multiple people in the military in the U.S. And only 1% of Americans will ever serve, where there's probably about 60% of Americans that are able to serve, and there's also multiple grant programs and stuff that exist to help with that.
Just to interject, oh, she's gone now, but goodbye. I was just going to say bye to Ashley.
Oh, sorry, Ashley. Goodbye. It was nice talking with you.
Yeah, hopefully she'll be around.
Bye, Ashley. Good talking with you again.
Next stream we do. Sorry to cut you off there. Just what I should say.
No worries. I was actually done. I apologize for rambling. I do that occasionally.
So I think you mentioned you know, it's nice. You said, you know, it's a hobby of yours to fix engines and be like electrician and stuff. And I forget the specific role it was, but it was like a mechanic sort of thing.
I'm an aircraft electrician. I work on power generation, lighting, avionics, radar, and also pressurization and life support.
Yeah. So that stuff, that field, aircraft, is something that is worth a lot in society. So, for instance, planes are used in the military. One of the America's highest, like wealth is certainly in America. Like, it's a massive industry, the biggest in the world by far, and thus worth millions. And on top of that, you've got aircraft in, you know, airplanes and transportation, and just personal aircraft, because, you know, that's a big field. That's something with a lot of money behind it. Therefore, your job is easier to be a hobby because it makes you enough to live off quite comfortably, I'd imagine, because it's quite a lucrative field. Whereas imagine someone pursuing art. Imagine it's someone who really enjoys singing or making games or playing a sport. If they have a much harder task getting into a position where that hobby also meets a living, because their field is less lucrative, or like it doesn't sell, the labor doesn't sell for either anything or enough to live off, or the people who do actually make it to the top are so finite compared to those who want to be at the position.
And that's fair. I actually was a professional musician.
Well, exactly. Like you.
Three Doors Down was my opening band. I literally grew up playing music. And yes, not everyone makes it. I'm living proof.
But that shouldn't mean that you should, you know, lose out on life. Like people who want to play the guitar, but you know, don't want to be some massive rock star. That's all right. You should be able to just enjoy playing an instrument. That's a great thing. But people lose out from that because they have to devote their time to selling their labor, because otherwise they won't have the money to buy the essentials in life and stuff. When society doesn't have to be that way. Imagine if instead of being told, no, you're never going to make it as a guitarist unless you're incredibly lucky, give it up and just sell labor elsewhere. People got told, well, you know, you might not become the next Bruce Springsteen, but you know, just keep it up because you might enjoy it. And there wasn't that pressure to sell your labor, because all of a sudden society doesn't run on the idea that workers should sell their labor to the capitalists to get in return the basics of society. You mentioned earlier. Actually, no, sorry. Geek mentioned sorry, just to interject myself. Yes, Rose is still here. She's just muted. But yeah, Geek mentioned the incentive of money not actually being a thing for a lot of people in industries. And not only is that true, but money actually in some cases ruins some industries. Like you look at the control that some corporations have over industries like the arts, and how it's essentially got Hollywood and other major studios into producing just sequels of the same films or TV shows that go nowhere but as opportunities for corporations to make more money and like sponsors to rack off massive things, massive franchises and stuff. You look at the way video games, for instance, like you look at the way EA are managing sports franchises, or Ubisoft are treating their franchises, and it's atrocious. Meanwhile, small people who have really good ideas have no chance of ever making a headway into it because their ideas threaten the wealth of larger corporations. And it's easy to say, oh, well, that's just the effect of unimportant things. But look at really important things like healthcare. American healthcare corporations hold back cures and treatment for some diseases because it's more profitable to make more people buy antibiotics to treat their, the symptoms rather than address the actual problem. For healthcare itself, like the fact you have to pay to get even access to it, that's actively making the population unhealthy and actually killing people. I mean, even now, you look at the flu epidemic that's sort of starting in America. There's no reason for that to be happening. Like you could so easily address that if you just let people access basic healthcare, but that's not profitable. So that's not going to happen. And we also have to consider automation as well. People selling their labor hours isn't going to cut it in a world where we've got machines that can do the job of what was previously thousands of workers. Look at a dockyard, for instance. What was once hundreds of workers lugging cargo around the bay is now one person operating in like 100, like one or two machines to lift dozens of containers every hour. Like that's, that shows that society needs a new system to replace the one that means you must sell your labor to survive. We've got to adapt, and capitalism isn't capable of that because it fundamentally requires you to sell your labor as a commodity on the free market. Anyway, I'm rambling again. So, Wolf, you were going to say something about the arts.
Oh yes, the one video that I kind of that it kind of inspired me to go on a rant was, I was watching, Paul Joseph Watson do this video about the arts, and this is pretty much like word for word, it's pretty much what he's saying. It's like this painting is bullshit because of these regressive social justice warrior virtue signalers who tell me to check my male privilege, and it's like it's nothing to do with it. Sorry, that was a really bad accent, but it's that similar thing. Like that's not the cause of it at all. It's this elitism that goes on with these art galleries. I mean, because it's kind of it is very much an elitism. It's kind of tied to capitalism a little bit, the way they do that. So I sort of disagree with what Paul Joseph was saying about the arts, because it's really tied to the elitism. The people at the top, they're choosing these works of art that are very, very abstract, and the average people probably wouldn't be able to understand. They use a language that's impenetrable to the public, and in a cultural way, it's like it's kind of a Marxist thing that, it's a collective. I guess it's a collective, not ownership, but a collective awareness of culture and, artistic trends. And, we're not going to see the everyday populist. You're not going to see their what the type of art they want to see, displayed in museums, where sort of the elite are the ones who are picking the artwork. So that's sort of a load of bullshit how the Paul Joseph Watson tries to spin it.
Yeah. No, I completely agree, actually. Like, the idea that art is determined, or the worth of art is determined by a free market is so disgusting. Like, imagine what we would have lost if what was popular, like, 100 years ago was, like, correct, because it was just popular and, like, the wealthy liked it. Imagine the composers we'd have lost if, the ruling class had just said, oh, well, your music is not what we want to listen to. Imagine if the films we consider like amazing today were just rendered worthless because they weren't as profitable as other films at the time. Like the idea that art is something that should be just like based on profit and stuff, and something that is determined by how much money it makes, what essentially how much it can produce in the capitalist class, is so gross in my opinion, because like you said, it contains art that is otherwise abstract and maybe like not unique to a certain field, like niche genres and stuff. It curtails it because all of a sudden it's not profitable, it's not got a widespread audience, and now suddenly it's dying out. So you see people have to divulge in. Sorry, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, I was like, because I think you were mentioning the music industry as well, and that's the thing that like I kind of got irritated with the Twitter, like with the feeds when they were talking about the Grammys, and I'm thinking like all of these people are in the Grammy, like they're all there because they've sold heaps of records and they've all made it. They're rich, they're famous, they've done exactly what they wanted to, and I know it seems wrong, but you know I've got no time for all these hashtags about complaining about who won the Emmys or the politics or whatever. Like my biggest concern are with the struggling musicians who are probably 10 times more talented than these people who are up on the stage, but it's like they have to work in a cafe just so they can pay to go to a gig. And even though they've got like infinitely like more talent and originality, it's just they're not given the break. Whereas these people at the top, they're being given these breaks. And some of that social justice activism, like some of it still concerns itself with a kind of yuppie bourgeois type protection of the upper class.
Yeah, well, no, exactly. I think what you were saying about the like idea of musicians who are smaller, like not having the chance despite being more talented than a lot of people at the big award ceremonies. It's so true. Like imagine you can go to your local theatre and you'll see people who are really talented, really work hard, and some of the most like down to earth, amazing people you'll ever meet. But they're never going to be as big as Johnny Depp's, the Angelina Jolie's, because they've not got the big companies behind them. Like you said, musicians. Like it doesn't matter how well you play the guitar if you having to compete with like a Sony or a Paramount or like another massive music producer, you're not gonna have that like a realistic chance. Like unless you get lucky and your song goes maybe viral or something, you're never going to be recognized. Just as I'm saying that, a very dead horse joins the chat. How are you, horse?
Howdy.
How's your birthday? How was your birthday the other day?
It was great. I don't know if did you see what the tweet said right after you commented on
I don't think so.
So I'll tell you exactly what it said real quick. So you said I don't remember exactly what we were talking about, something about capitalism, and I kind of poked and prodded you about it, and actually, just go ahead and continue. I'm going to find the tweet real quick, and I'll just share it real quick. You guys continue what you're talking about. I didn't mean to interrupt and stop everything here.
No worries. I'm sure it was enlightened either way, horse. Anyway, but yeah, like the people who work with companies and corporations that have far larger capital and wealth than others are always going to have the upper hand regardless of their talent, because they've got the financial might to control advertising, control their time in the spotlight, control where they get to go. Like you look at the Grammys, for instance, like you're not going to get like front seat bidding and stuff, and not like center stage if you're not exceedingly wealthy. Wolf, you've been excellent today. I completely disagree with that. No, certainly, you got to look at the conditions that affect society. And to come back to what I was saying a while ago, these people who don't necessarily have the weight of someone like Ed Sheeran or something shouldn't be barred from pursuing something they're actively good at just because of the fact their labor hasn't produced as much profit for the capitalist class. I think we've got a fundamental problem in society if we base people's worth on how much money they make for other people. And that ultimately comes down to any aspect of capitalism. I feel like it's such a broad criticism of the system that and encompasses so much of our society that if we can see it as negative on one element, like the arts or like video games, we should be able to see it for all elements of society. Like it's something that affects everything. And thus,
now, Owen, you live in the UK, correct?
yeah.
Okay. This is kind of a Londoner accent you have going on. So there is some form of universal health care. It's not completely 100% like what you would see in the Scandinavian countries. I understand that. Let me ask you this. Why is it that you see cancer patients or like I can't remember the baby's name, the Charlie whatever, that was essentially killed by the UK government? Why were they denied? Why do you see cancer patients in the UK fly to the US for treatment? You also see this coming out of Canada. Why do you see a baby being sentenced to death by high UK courts for now not allowing their parents who raised the money to pay for their children to go to the US to get treatment, potentially life-saving, potentially not? We can debate that. But why is there rationing? Why is there such rationing in the UK? Which, I mean, this is a socialized healthcare plan, and it's failing. It's failing its people.
Okay. So firstly, it's not actually socialized. There is the healthcare system that is national, but it's partly privatized as well. So, for instance, dental care is private, and if you're over 18, you have to pay for dentistry, which is pretty horrific. But to come back to what you were saying, the NHS in our country has been, and as many parts of our nation have been subject to, have been privatized, and is in the process of severe defunding from the Conservative government, which is leading to the eventual privatization, or what they hope will be the privatization of it. So, for instance, we saw this with railways, with transportation, with energy, and it's a classic tactic of neoliberalism, and a idea and process which is sort of inherent to capitalism's eventual decline of growth and stuff. So when growth dries up, when profits are harder to come by, you start defunding the functions of the state and eventually privatizing them. So the NHS is being privatized, so it's having less money poured into it, which means hospitals are being overrun, they got understaffed, there's not enough doctors to see everyone, there's people waiting in A&E for horrific amounts of time, and then the government then says, oh, well, the system's not working, we need to privatize it, we need to put a free market in. And then hopefully the Conservatives hopefully for the Conservatives, they'll move to a more American style system where you have to pay to access it, where you have to pay for everything. So if this was a proper socialist system, this problem would never arise, because the UK is clearly wealthy enough to afford everyone a sustainable healthcare, to have a hospital and a doctor near every single person who needs it, to have a system where your needs are addressed, and there's no like waiting stupid times in A&E to being seen. The problems you describe are absolutely problems, but they're problems caused of capitalism and its inherent like devaluing of critical elements of society in order to produce profit. And as we're seeing, capitalism is no longer in its growth period; it's in its decay, quite clearly. It's going to, cause problems where elements of society are defunded. It's why the welfare state benefits and stuff, that's been cut. It's why disability benefits has been massively targeted, and it's an absolute like disgrace what's going on with people who are on disability benefits and access, which I'm sure, Ted, you could probably elaborate on, definitely.
Yeah, should I? Was that an invitation?
Yeah, no, definitely. I feel like you'd be more qualified to talk about that side of it, if you don't mind saying that, of course.
Well, right now I'm in the process of applying for this new benefit. They've changed it to it used to be something of disability living allowance, which quite widely most disabled people severe enough God. Now it's this thing of personal independence independence fund, which is marked according to how independent you are. But the trouble is, independence is such an abstract thing. You can't really quantify it, and it varies from person to person. So basically, they're trying to find a way to prove you don't need the benefits. And that's what capitalism does. It pollutes everything. Just makes it all evil.
Exactly. The idea that people who aren't able to sell their labor are just, lying about it, and you need to prove that. Then the idea of the organizations and the change from the benefit system to make it so that disabled people have to prove they are unable to be independent and be in the situations where sometimes they clearly need that funding, they're denied it because the capitalist class and the capitalist system has said no. Well, you can still produce profit, and it's clearly inhumane because if you look at the statistics for what's happened with a lot of disabled people, it's caused literal death. It's causing people to be in a situation where they're having to work despite being not fit to work. Not in any condition to do it, be either mentally or physically, and causing them to literally die. That's what's going on in the exactly. That's what's going on in the UK because of the capitalism's inevitable decline and the capitalist class trying to protect their profits over people. That's inherent to capitalism even.
Also, Sean on the channel, Sean did a video not too long ago about the privatization of the train system in the UK. And so if you want to know more about that specific issue of how the privatization of a public service of the train system and how that affected the UK and how it doesn't work, Sean did a great video on that.
Yeah, I think in many ways, the UK is an example of not just how capitalism is bad, but also how a system with capitalism and elements of other systems is also flawed. Because whilst you have systems that are good, they're eventually going to be consumed by capitalism. They're going to be taken away and stripped down of their good elements to make more profit or to protect the profits and status of the wealthy. So the NHS, for instance, which is fundamentally light years ahead of American healthcare, but is in real crisis at the moment because capitalism will eventually consume it and is turning it into a for-profit system. And we're seeing the implications of this every day with headlines like people having to wait hours and hours in A&E, hospital wards where there aren't enough beds per patient. And this is all because of capitalism, because we value profits over people. So naturally, it's the capitalist class are going to protect their own wealth over the conditions of others. So to come back to what you were saying, Barky, health, the fact the NHS is suffering is because of capitalism, directly because of capitalism. And you were going to say something, Rose.
Yeah, I was going to say something about healthcare. Like you brought up people having to, wait for hours, for stuff that's very necessary and sometimes really urgent. And hearing that coming out of the UK, I think this is I think it's a really bad situation for me as an American if hearing about that coming out of the UK. And not being just kind of thinking, oh, this is exactly what I've gone through. This is stuff that I've seen. I just assumed this happened everywhere else. This was just the norm.
Sorry to interject. Once I was about to say goodbye to Wolf.
Bye, Wolf. We'll chat later.
Once again, I was too late.
Sorry.
No worries. Wolf. It was great having you, and hopefully we can stream again. Anyway, continue, Rose.
But yeah, I just thought that it's very important to like realize too that like for a lot of poor people in America, what you're describing happening with the NHS and how waiting times are going up because of privatization. I mean, if you're poor in America, like if you come from like inner city or you come from an inner city, you come from or just like the city in general, and you come from a poor background, you're just kind of used to needing to wait there in healthcare, or at least that has been my experience. I've severely injured myself, but still had to wait 4 hours just to be seen by a doctor in a nearly empty hospital before.
I think it says something of capitalism that it's actually a privilege to wait for healthcare at all instead of not receive it. Like there's people who actively avoid hospitals and avoid getting their needs met because it will cost, and that will contribute to them missing meals or not being able to pay rent. Like the fact that people have to weigh up valuable parts of their life and decide whether they're more important is something that takes place every day under capitalism. There's millions of Americans and people in the West missing meals to afford their rent. There's millions of people in America suffering from really easily treatable illnesses and diseases that don't have access to that treatment because it will cost them and won't be able to afford the other elements of their life.
Now, Owen, there are people in Venezuela right now who are missing meals because the bread lines don't have any. There's people in Argentina that are waiting exorbitant amount of times in order to get health care because there aren't enough doctors. You can't sit there and just blame it strictly on capitalism. The reality is supply and demand is a real thing. Okay, if you don't have enough doctors, if you have more patients and you have doctors, you're going to have you're going to have a bottleneck feature in the service provided. When it comes to access, everyone has access in America to healthcare. Now, they may not have the means to pay for it, and that is where people get wrapped around the axle. There are multitude of ways in order to get funding for most healthcare. Now, for non-essential healthcare, sorry if you need a boob job, that's really not going to happen through a lot of means. But if you're looking for actual necessary healthcare needs, there are ways to raise money. There's actual grants. There's actually some insurance, which I really have been looking into lately. It's where you get it's kind of like the idea of like Obamacare started out with in practice, in actual theory, but all it is people agreeing, hey, we're going to pay X amount, and however much is being pulled out of the pool, we'll pay for it. There's been some problems that I've run across, and I'm still not done researching all of it, so it's kind of hit and miss.
If I could pop in, I know what you're talking about. There's usually it's like a Christian-based thing, but I mean, I'm sure there's other different versions, and where basically they pay a certain amount a month, and then they're like, oh, well, this person really needs this, and so we're gonna give this month's to this person, and they're gonna get whatever money that we've collected or whatever. But another reason why we've got so many, the waiting time in the emergency rooms is we've got people coming in with the sniffles, and they're in line 5 people ahead of someone who's got a hole in their hand, like what happened to me. And so there's a lady with a kidney stone who is literally sitting there drinking like a huge thing of Mountain Dew while I'm waiting with a big hole in my hand, and a lady with the sniffles and a few other things. So it's not just it's not as black and white. As you're
one thing
trying to explain it.
One thing that I like to say, and you haven't probably seen any of my stuff. You have mentioned one word. You have said the F word over and over. Fair. There is no such thing as fair. Fair is a pipe dream that we teach our children in order to play nice with each other. The reality is the world is not fair. And
isn't that because of capitalism?
No, because it doesn't matter if it's in a non-capitalist society. I mean, have you been to non-capitalist societies and noticed that things aren't fair? I have.
They're even less fair.
I mean, go to Saudi Arabia as an Indian and, as a red dot Indian and find out how fair it is. Go down to Argentina and see how fair it is down there. Peru. Go to Thailand. It's fair is a nice dream, but it's not a reality is the problem.
Under capitalism, that's true.
Well, no. Non-capitalist countries, you still see the same effect. People are corrupt. People are inherently selfish.
So hold on. Hold on 1 second. I gotta ask Owen this because the way every time that you're questioned about one of these other countries that we say are not capitalist, you say that they are capitalist, and every time that we say, well, this is not a capitalist society, this is a communist society, and you say it's a capitalist society, so I get really confused as to where your baseline of
because his argument is the fact that communism has never been done properly.
Okay. I know, but it's obviously something, but I'm trying to figure out it's not capitalism because communism isn't capitalism. And obviously, there's a bunch of, varying degrees of not quite capitalism and kind of capitalism and capitalism. I mean, basically, fascist forms of, fascist takeovers of capitalism where part of the society is capitalistic and other parts have been taken over by the government. So, I kind of need to know your base. When you think of capitalism, what do you think of? And when you think of the closest thing to what you would say is a socialistic society or a communistic society, I need to know what that is, like in your brain.
Okay, so when we describe capitalism, we describe the private ownership of the means of production. So that's the tools of which society is built. And then in private hands, we talk about the profiting of commodities to accrue more capital. So the idea that you take what you have and make more with what you have by selling commodities for a higher price at which you attained them from to make more capital for yourself. And that's a system which the vast majority of the countries in the world use, bar a few. But the fact that they aren't capitalist does not mean they are communist. Communism is sort of the opposite of this, the idea that workers and thus society, the people in society as a collective should own everything. Thus, the abolition of class, the abolition of the state, the idea
has that ever existed?
Sorry?
Has that ever existed?
Well, no, because you can't have a stateless society in a society with capital. So, there's no.
Okay, so you're even admitting that it's a pipe dream. So the dream of Marx, what even Marx determined to be
that's not
unobtainable.
I think it's a pipe dream. That's saying that it's not existed yet. That's like saying.
Well, how would it exist? How would we get there?
The workers of the world overthrow the capitalist class. They seize the means of production from the ruling class, which have possession of them, and thus make a society in which everyone is able to live without having to sell their labor, in which the tools of which we have more, the automation process, the abundance of resources we have, are controlled by society as a whole. That's not a pipe dream. That's something that's quite easily achievable.
Okay, well now let me ask you this, Owen, just follow up. How should things such as social loafing be addressed then? In a socialist society, in a purely socialist society, there's a deal that you see, especially in social sciences, where they talk about social loafing. How is social loafing handled in a socialist society?
What do you mean by social loafing?
Social loafing means that, have you ever worked in a group and you had that one guy that's like, yeah, man, I'll just let you handle this. You got this, man. You're doing such a great job, and they just kind of sit off in the corner and do nothing.
And so
that is social loafing. So how is that handled?
Apply that to society, though. What?
No, you have to apply that to society because you see that in society. It's quite often. It's rampant in society. So how is that addressed? Because in capitalism, the way that it's addressed is they starve.
But the social
they get fired.
Social loafing is done by the wealthy, because if you notice, the wealthy
no,
not
at all.
No wealthy person does nothing. I will tell you this: unless they are the Anderson Coopers of the world, who doesn't have to work, who's a Vanderbilt. No, my uncle is a CEO at a shipyard. Okay, he puts in 16 hours a day, 6 days a week.
He can't make his money without the labor of everyone else underneath him.
No, he can't. But you know what? He's also putting in hella hours. He is constantly working.
Sure.
Okay, what you don't understand is executives, people who are widely successful, they are putting in the work as well. It is not all these people putting in all the work and them doing nothing. There's constant work.
Their employees are responsible for their wealth, so why should they be wealthier than all their employees? Their employees,
they are helping.
They're managing the entire company.
They are helping their employees become wealthy.
One worker may be working on one little project, an executive is working on the entire company.
But
that doesn't have to be towards just one person. One person doesn't have to just like manage a whole bunch of different projects. That can be shared communally.
No. Yeah. Because
so you're still going to have a community leader.
Because people aren't going to negotiate with a community. That's really
hold on one second. Even with that, you're going to have a community leader. That community leader is essentially the boss. So you're not doing anything. You're just changing names.
One person as a leader.
Why do you need one person? You don't need one person, but you need a smaller group as the leader. And the reason why is because you can't sit there and let's say we're all one big commune right here. And I'm an outsider. I'm definitely an outsider in this commune, and that's fine. Okay. I like you guys. I'm going to come over and talk. So I go over and talk to Geek and I go, hey Geek, bro, let's talk about, this kind of trade. And Geek says, sounds like a great idea. We move on, and I come back next week. But hey, Geek isn't there because Geek is sick, and now I have talked to you, Owen. And I'm like, hey, I talked to Geek about this, blah blah blah. We came to this agreement, and you said, well, I don't fully agree with that. No, you have to have cohesion. You have to have continuity, and that's why there's usually a smaller group of people that lead in any society. That's really more about continuity. So everyone is kind of on the same page. There's a direction that things are pointed into.
And that comes about naturally. So
yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean you have a tiered ranking of society. And also
that even happens.
It'll evolve into that though. It will evolve into that though.
But it won't.
I don't think it has to.
But it won't. If you remove the class structure that has predetermined society under capitalism, if you remove the idea that life is a series of commodities to be profited off, you've moved the elements that allow groups in society to take control, as we see under capitalism. To go back to what you were saying, Sparky, about the the dockyard worker dockyard business owner who comes up with all these ideas. I mean, firstly, that's not necessarily true, because if you look at what
he doesn't do it all on his own. I'm not pretending like he does.
Yeah, exactly. So why is even if he thought of every single innovative, great idea, if he requires the work of all these workers to make his dream possible, from the people who get the materials to those who make it, to those who sail the ships, to those who sell his products elsewhere, why should they receive the produce of their labor, receive the profits from the labor, to receive the entire wealth from it, and then the workers who are every bit as responsible as the boss, in fact, the people who do the work, receive none of that? And that's the same with anything. Why should, for instance, a company like Nike be able to have its wealth go to its shareholders and the people at the top?
Sorry.
Well, okay. The reason why is because ultimately, in the grand scheme, when you look at it, it's about the breadth of responsibility.
Yeah,
is really where it boils down.
Hold on one second. Ted.
I'm about to fall asleep. It's 3 in the morning.
Oh, yeah, no, it is.
Yeah, I mean it's like 3:15 over there. I mean it's late over. Yeah, I mean it's like late over here. It's like 7 for Geek.
Yeah, it's like 7:15. I'm gonna have to start dinner soon.
But okay, well, it looks like we're closing this up. Hey, as a newcomer to this group, thank you. And Ted, I love you, dude. Good times.
Son, you can keep talking without me. Didn't mean to.
Oh, it's okay. I mean,
it's getting late over there, buddy.
Anyway, because it's. I mean, we're in the same time zone, Ted, and it's like I'm getting pretty tired myself. So.
Before Piper, do you still want to like say something? You've been interested to say something.
Oh gosh, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. So like Venezuela got brought, and we've kind of moved past this a little bit, but Venezuela got brought up, and I've been itching to say something about that since then. So when people bring up socialism in any way, there's a common response of, oh well, that's what's happening in Venezuela. Venezuela socialism. So if you want socialism, just look at Venezuela. But it's just wrong. So Venezuela is not a non-capitalist society; it's a capitalist society. The only thing that, the fundamental order of society, the social order, never actually changed. What changed was that they had a regime change. So basically, Chavez was elected into power, and that meant that the old government, which was primarily a puppet government of the United States and Western countries, was no longer in power, and now Chavez was in power. And Chavez, and then his legacy with Maduro has been, opposed in some form to the United States and Western powers and their authority in Latin America. That's been what's happened. It's not capitalism hasn't left Venezuela, and this point is highlighted by the fact that the reason that Venezuela now they do have shortages in specific necessary products, but there are also many other consumer products available. But the shortages that do exist of things like toilet paper, those are caused by companies that oppose the Maduro government, and so basically they basically refuse to put those products up for sale on the market to try to shock the government into doing what they want.
Well, is there any true socialist society today? Is really the question that I would ultimately have.
Sorry to bypass that question quickly, Spike. I'll come back to it in a second, and Pat, I'm sure will as well. But this is the classic tactic of America and American imperialism and capitalism to ruin and sabotage any attempts to stray even slightly from the method of capitalism. The crimes of America globally are easy to read about and very well documented. And any time a country tries to move away from something that directly benefits American profits, America swoops in and either sabotages the government, stages a coup, outright invades, and you can see this across Latin America. The Americans are blocking, well, not Americans, and the American government is blocking aid to Venezuela. Like, the fact that that's happening is proof that capitalism and its propagators it's in its best interest to ruin any attempts to stray from it. Because if if people see that if a nation that isn't following the norms is doing all right, then they're gonna have problems. Which isn't to say that Venezuela, was socialist or was a good nation, because no, it's clearly it had a massive private sector. It was run by a political class. It's clearly not socialist. It clearly doesn't follow the major tenets of socialism. The fact they nationalized a few things doesn't mean that it wasn't still in control of a political class. It still had a class system. It still had the idea of selling your labor, to make a living. The fact you still have all those things means it's clearly not socialist.
No.
But that still doesn't mean that the problems today are more complex than just not capitalism equals poverty and badness.
I also want to point out that I'm not trying to apologize for the regime in Venezuela or something. I was just pointing out why the argumentative tactic of look at Venezuela doesn't really work. Anyway.
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, that's just the most recent socialist country that I can think of. That's the only reason why I brought it up.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Well,
but, like,
no, it's not even purely socialist. What I want to know is there a purely socialist government that exists today in the world?
Well, if it was purely socialist, they wouldn't have a government, which is sort of a point we're trying to get. There's no, like, the system we advocate for is that, the class system, the idea that we need a ruling class is, moved on with, because workers are capable of self-management. You don't need to elevate a class of people to have power.
No, they're not.
Sorry?
I'm sorry, they're not. They're really not.
Really
I've worked so many different jobs with so many different people. Some people are capable of self-management.
Definitely not
at least half of them aren't capable of self-management. Some people are highly motivated. Some people don't need a boss and could see their boss maybe once a month and be totally fine. Some people, if they don't see their boss for an hour, they're doing nothing for that hour.
That's not that's not quite what we mean by when we say work.
I get it. I know what you mean, but some people are just inherently lazy, and the things that motivate them to stay task oriented or to stay task oriented or do a good job are the benefits, are the let's see. So, like, we used to have this program at a place I used to work where employees would get certain electronics. And I'm echoing. Did somebody unplug their headphones or something? Sorry. Okay, sorry. I was hearing myself back in my ear, and I'm like, this sounds weird. So, like, they would give away a certain electronic device, usually like sometimes it would be like something like an iPad or something for the employee of the month. The employee would work, and everybody who was motivated would bust their butt to get this thing. And, in addition to those people would also be more, they put out more production. They would be there on time. They would, so when this kind of correlates to what I was coming in when you asked about my birthday. I found the tweet. You had said something to the effect of, the quote was, "There is no incentive there is no incentive under communism," and you put that in quotations. And you say, "Then stay home in your house and sulk. The rest of us will be liberated from the." And I can't read it because it cut off on here. But as soon as you had said that, I said, well, I quote tweeted it and said, well, it must be my birthday. And this makes me laugh a lot. So thanks, Owen. And as soon as I had said it was my birthday, a place called Medieval Times commented underneath underneath the actual thing and said, celebrate this birthday like kings and queens and feast for a discount. And then they left me a coupon code and a link underneath. And and my response to that was, haha, thanks. God bless capitalism. So that was what I was trying to see if you actually saw the other day. And it made my day really happy.
Well, I'm glad your birthday was made, of course.
At your expense, I'm sorry.
Right. Anyway, what was I going to say? You were talking about laziness and the idea that people are inherently lazy, and I completely disagree. I think that, some people, they're not suited as such to certain workplaces, but this idea of laziness and that people are, they're lazy, so they have given a boss and given people to, guide them or force them into doing certain tasks is one that's grafted of, capitalist ideas and ideals about how the workers should behave. So, for instance, you're lazy if you don't work and if you just stay in bed and stuff. That's essentially saying you're bad if you aren't selling your labor hours to the capitalist. You're bad if you aren't making the ruling class more wealth. You notice how this isn't applied to, say,
no, it just means you're wasting your life.
But okay, so a follow up to that, Owen.
If you just let me finish this, and then you can say something, Sparky. like you don't see this applied to those of the upper class who do very little, but essentially, socialize with their friends and don't contribute to anything but their own experience. And
they don't do very little.
Sorry,
they don't do very little. Is what was my point.
Like the wealthy people who, just loaded and
how much
shareholders.
You have
ExxonMobil does.
I'm sorry, Piper. Go ahead, man.
How much do you think the CEO of ExxonMobil does?
A lot.
I'm sure he has meetings pretty much all day long. I'm sure he has to get people to run numbers. He has to send people to do things. He has to. I mean, okay, so one of my former employers is a multimillionaire, and he started out on a card table in someone's house, and someone is echoing again. Damn it. And he has built his business from literally nothing to driving Maseratis. So, and I know every single process of this dude working 16 hours a day, busting his butt so that he can get back to working just 8. And sometimes it's usually not even just 8. He's still working 10 hours a day, but you have to delegate. That's what a boss does. That's what millionaires do. They delegate their responsibilities because they want to have a bigger vision of what they want to get done, right? So they'll like someone who maybe doesn't have the means to invent something or do his own thing necessarily at the moment. He can hire this particular person, and if this person can take orders and can write things down, has a good memory, and can show up on time, he can make this other dude more money, and then thus making it helps both of them out. I mean, it's not like you make it sound like it's completely like this person's a slave to capitalism. But my former boss, I mean, he has helped so many people with what he specifically does, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people.
And we're looking at the whole system, not just one case-by-case individual. We gotta remember that.
If they were a millionaire, then they still stole the produce of their labor. They made themselves vastly wealthier than the people.
They made other people vastly wealthier.
Can I add a quick thing? Yeah. So, like, you can talk about individuals who are rich for whatever reason. So you could talk about, I don't know, football players or something. Or you could talk about somebody who's made a lot of money doing YouTube videos or whatever you want to, you could even talk about the upper level of management in a company. But when you talk about the people who, the actual capitalists, the people who own enterprises, specifically large enterprises like large corporations, those are shareholders. And they own those companies because they have shares in those companies. They have a majority share. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that their share entitles them to a large check of money that comes in the mail every month. And when they go outside of their house and they walk down to their mailbox and they take the little postcard with a check in it, that's the work that they're doing. The rest of the work is done by the rest of the work. Can I finish? Thank you. The rest of the work is being done by upper and mid-level management, and then the workers who are paid wages by that enterprise. The people that actually own, enterprises, capitalists, have gotten in, have started, basically farming out even the work that they may have had to do. So things like marketing to upper level management. So
the idea that like
making everyone else money.
No, but it's not though, is it? Because if it was actually like, because imagine like if the person who ran McDonald's was gonna look after their workers, you wouldn't see people in sweatshops and horrid like slave-like conditions across the world making the CEOs of McDonald's and like shareholders and stuff billions. like that wouldn't be happening. But instead, people at the top of the corporation are, you know, living amazing lives through the forced suffering and miserable conditions.
It's not forced.
Of course it is. If they don't work for McDonald's, they're going to have no job.
They can work somewhere else.
But they made that choice.
Another corporation with the same conditions.
No, they can work for a mom and pop shop. They can work for themselves. They can do anything that they want.
Are you serious? Like, what do you think these people have? Like, because all the like, okay, so imagine you live in a village in like Southeast Asia, for instance, and all the land has suddenly been bought by a corporation, given, you know, by the government, because if the government doesn't let US corporations buy up land, then the US will impose sanctions on the nation, as we saw in Ghana, where they had a famine because they wouldn't let the US buy up their land. So anyway, your village, you know, the lands have been bought up by McDonald's, and you can go and work for McDonald's on the land, or you can move to the city where you can get a job at a McDonald's factory, or a Nike factory, or an Adidas factory. And, you know, all the land, again, is owned by wealthy foreign entities or wealthy entities that are themselves owned by McDonald's. And so you're wherever you go, you're going to work for one of these corporations. And yeah, you can say, oh, well, this isn't really fair. I want to be earning more. But, you know, you're one worker, and everyone else in that situation is going to accept the conditions, because it turns out you need money to pay for food and stuff. And if you don't accept that job, you're going to have nowhere to live, nowhere to pay rent. No means of paying rent, and not be able to survive. Like the idea that you can just say to your boss, oh, you know, I want a raise, and if you don't pay me fairly, I'm going to leave. It's just that doesn't happen. You can't do that.
Yes, you can.
You can't.
I've done it.
So
I've literally done it.
Can I ask? So what would be the process of, you know, people living in slum villages outside of cities in Africa? What would be their process of, you know, becoming self-employed superstar entrepreneurs? How would they do that?
Who are you asking, me or Aircraft?
I mean, to anybody who thinks you can just work for yourself or something, you know,
well, I would say in Africa that's not going to happen, because that continent is completely terrible. I've yet to find a good place there. Yes.
I know why it's terrible.
It's a horror.
It's terrible because the global capitalist economy has developed.
It's terrible because they enslave each other and they use rape as a weapon.
Well, no, that's not why it's terrible. It's terrible
really? Go to the Congo and find out.
I mean,
it's terrible.
The Congo.
Go to the Sudan. Jesus Christ.
I mean, I'm aware that it's terrible, but I'm trying to tell you why it's terrible. So it's terrible because the global capitalist economy has developed as such that countries in the third world are predominantly producing things to be exported to countries like the United States.
The biggest problem that I've seen and been to Africa.
That means that they do not produce for their local economy, and that means that their local economy basically goes into ruins. And, you know, whatever they need is subsidized by countries like the United States. So, you know, there was a scandal with Bill Clinton sending, you know, a huge amount of rice to Haiti. And what that's basically doing is that's giving them the things that their local economy needs so that they can keep exporting to the US. So, but if they're not actually producing those things themselves and like selling them in local markets, then it doesn't actually benefit their economy. So
let me just interject this, please. The problem with Africa is tribalism. Okay, everywhere you go, it's tribalism. Currently in South Africa, you have different tribes warring with each other and killing off systematically white people because of apartheid that happened 20, 30 years ago.
That is not what's happening, no.
I don't know how many times you've been to Africa or even outside the state you live in, pal, but I've been there. I've seen it. It's terrible.
You're wrong.
Okay.
You can crack open.
Also,
you can watch the crack open a book or watch a documentary you want. Like that's like not what's happening.
Also, to ignore the centuries of colonialism that has affected Africa, like you look at the British Empire and what they did.
Okay, but let me ask you: are you conflating colonialism with capitalism?
No.
Here, because
colonialism is the tool, a tool of which capitalism uses to accrue profit. Why do you think the empire?
What I'm saying is, yes, you can.
Colonialism evolved into capitalism. I mean, if anything, look at Canada with the HBC, with the Hudson Bay Company. That was pure colonialism that eventually evolved into capitalism.
Well, that's what we're saying. Like the colonial era is, that's a byproduct of the idea of, seeking to get more with your capital, more capital, more control. That's what capitalism is.
But Britain ceded all their territories in Africa. What? 60 years ago?
That still doesn't mean.
I mean, the empire can only last so long. The empire does not exist anymore.
The empire still made Britain wealthy at the expense of the rest of the world.
Yes, it did. It did.
Exactly. That's what we're saying. That's
but how long do you sit there and go? These people are still suffering under the throes of colonialism when there's generations of people who don't even know what happened.
Process I just described of the economies of the third world being subservient to the economies of the Western world, the United States. That's called neocolonialism, which basically means that even though formal colonialism in the form of actual colonies and occupation has
here's the thing, Piper.
There's still no, let me finish. So there's still geopolitical and economic subservience that nations in the third world have to nations in the West, like the United States.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so there's other nations that are technically considered third world nations because they literally had these governments where they installed these. They're like screw democracy, screw capitalism. We're gonna do things our way. We're gonna do what we want, and then they failed. And not only do some places like like Brazil and Argentina have the perfect way, the perfect growing conditions for any crop they could think of, and Venezuela has the perfect conditions to grow year round. There should never be anyone starving in Venezuela, never. There's so much, it's almost impossible not to grow things there.
Okay, looking at chat real quick. Logan Stotler, aka Fluffy, my hetero life mate, states people sell their labor for wages because they don't take the risk. They don't take upon the burden of financial risk for the business. They could just stop selling outside of Africa. These third world countries could. So
hold on a second.
I don't even know what that means. What do you mean stop selling outside of Africa? That has nothing to do with my.
Okay, well, third world countries in Africa don't have to sell their stuff to outside agencies.
I mean, yeah, they do because they accrued a bunch of debt to those number one, it's the legacy of colonialism. So the fact that when the colonial powers invaded those countries originally and established colonies, they were doing the same thing, right, and forcing them to produce for the mother colonial country. And number two, it's the fact that because of the economic and geopolitical supremacy of countries like the United States, these third world nations have accrued massive amounts of debts that they owe to institutions which represent those Western powers, like the IMF. And also, so they can't subvert what Western countries want for their economic policy. It's structured structurally, they just can't do it.
Yeah. Sorry to say, firstly, I want to sort of draw this to a conclusion because it's quite late in the UK. But secondly, I wanted just to add on to Piper's point. We've already seen what happens when African countries start refusing to bow to American capitalism and American trade standards. And like Piper said, the IMF and the UN, they cut them off. Like Ghana refused to privatize previously nationally owned land to American corporations. So America boycotted them and put in powers to blacklist Ghana, and a famine happened. We look at African nations which are entirely controlled by American corporations in a sense, or their industries are, because if they don't, they're facing economic turmoil and even worse conditions. To sit there and say, oh, well, African countries could just do X, Y, Z, as though it's like a free world and not one that's entirely controlled by the capitalist system and thus the rules of the capitalist system, is incredibly naive and ignorant of the way the world is. really. Like, to ignore the legacy of the British Empire, which went around the world ravaging cultures to further its own profits, and then to say, oh, well, that was ages ago, as though it had no, as though it doesn't have any continuing effect today, and isn't part of why capitalism is the way it is today, and the way like the world is structured is, ridiculous. India had, manufactured famines to create profit for the UK. Winston Churchill, celebrated as this great war leader, is responsible for some of the biggest atrocities in world history in India, where he let people starve and made people starve because of their refusal to continue serving UK. Like, the fact that we have such wealth in the West is because of our history of colonialism and capitalism, not because Africa has got this problem with its cultures and stuff. Because if you look at history, if you look at when Europe was going through the what's called the Dark Ages and stuff, and the medieval period, there was so much happening in Africa and in the Middle East and in Latin America, but colonialism came, and colonialism and its predecessor capitalism has allowed the West to maintain dominance over the rest of the world, and to pretend that the West is just inherently better, and Africa's got this tribalism and stuff, and all these other like lies essentially, is just flat out wrong. And I'm sorry to sort of say that we should probably draw this to a close, but I feel as though the next few points you want to make, try and make them a bit more concise, and like maybe we can continue the discussion another time, because it's approaching 4 in the morning. So
plus I've got to be up tomorrow for a job interview.
Well, good luck on your job interview.
Good luck. Work hard.
Good luck, Rose.
Yeah.
But hey, for your audience, for those who don't know me, I am Aircraft Sparky. Please check me out on my channel on YouTube on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Central U.S. time zone. We look at current events, we make fun of things, and we also talk to people. I'm planning to talk with, I actually want to get in touch with Geek and Owen to set up some debates for later. We'll talk after air. Please follow me on Twitter at Aircraft Sparky, and the rest of my information we found on my YouTube channel. Thank you for having me. It's been a brilliant discussion. Great people here. I'd like to thank my host, Owen Wilson, Owen McDonald, sorry.
The actor.
Owen McDonald for allowing me on tonight. It has been great. Thank you so much.
Not a problem. It's been great having all of you on, and I hope to do more like this in the future, because it's been really great. Sorry to end the sort of stream so abruptly. It's quite late here, and I'm quite tired.
Oh, we managed to talk about a lot.
Yeah, I was surprised, actually. I mean, I had 3 power outages during this Hangout, and like 1 before and 2 others before, but I managed to jump back in. So, and since Aircraft Sparky pretty well.
Oh no!
Oh no!
There's a good picture though.
That is a good picture of it.
That would be 5 power.
And follow me on Twitter too at SomeRandomGeek with the E's and Geek being 3s.
Please redo that, Geek, because you died on us.
Heard nothing. I'm sorry.
Can you hear us?
No, we didn't hear you at all. Please do your spill again.
I am Some Random Geek. I do movie reviews. I do anime reviews. I talk about politics, or should start talking about politics, and I also do Let's Plays. Subscribe to my channel and follow on my Twitter.
Okay.
What if I don't want to? You can't tell me what to do.
All right.
Anyway, I'll link to everyone's channels and stuff in the description for this stream.
I'll do the same when I mirror this too.
Yeah.
And follow American Anarchists and Sub American Anarchists, and follow Piper Social Revolution and the Social Revolution on YouTube as well.
Thank you for plugging me.
You're welcome.
And if I could real quick, I haven't been doing very much on my channel recently, but I'm a very dead horse. I'm a very dead horse on Twitter.
Good thing we haven't been beating you.
That never gets old. On my channel, what has been going on my channel is another show called The Dump that my friend Unknown Archive runs on my channel. They watch really crappy TV. Yeah. So he's been running that on my channel. We've been he just basically gets high and does a sort of Mystery Science Theater 3000 kind of thing. It's fun for everybody, pretty much. So even people who would disagree with me politically should enjoy. Maybe go subscribe if you want to.
Brilliant. Okay. Any more channel advertisements?
Well, I do have a Patreon that you can also donate to.
Such a capitalist.
One must survive.
I need to eat.
I know.
No, exactly.
It's just funny to me. Sorry, continue.
Anyway, it's been a great stream. Thanks everyone for coming, and hopefully we'll do another similar one next time. Like Sparky said, hopefully we'll have some individual debates between certain members of the groups you see here.
That'd be fun.
And I hope you all look forward to it. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Right on. Thank you.
Yep.